This is a big one.
Bye!
Ni hao! Ni hao, everybody. That's how you say hello in Chinese. I learned that up. Yes, this is a big one. Such a big one. As a matter of fact, just gonna get through this. My name is Michael Lucht. Welcome to Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. And today is a weird assortment. Tales of high strangeness from China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Without further ado, we're going to jump right in because, man, there is a lot. Let's do this! Okay, I've got some soothing / meant to be spooky at some point. So says the copyright-free music people where I get this music. Your mileage may vary. Alright, so I believe in the last two previous episodes, I mentioned an incident called the Meng Jiaogu incident. This is one of many incidents known as the Roswell of China. There's been quite a few incidents that have been tagged with this. I think that's more of a popularity, similarity. There was an actual case that sounds very much like the actual events of the Roswell of China, but it's not all that interesting. This, however, is very interesting. This is hands down the most famous alien abduction story in Chinese history. A lumberjack named Meng Jiaogu in Heilongjiang claimed he saw a metallic object on Phoenix Mountain. When he went to investigate, he was reportedly hit by a beam of light and knocked unconscious. He later claimed a 10-foot tall female alien, with braided fur, quote-unquote braided fur on her legs, visited him in his home, levitated him, and they had a 40-minute intimate encounter, we'll call it, while his wife slept right nearby. I would say that the 40 minutes is probably the most hard to believe part. Come on, 40 minutes? What is he, some kind of tantric Superman? The case turned into this case turned Phoenix Mountain into a massive pilgrimage site for Chinese UFO enthusiasts and led to the formation of several UFO research groups that skirted a line between hobbyist clubs and spiritual movements. Now, the Meng Jiaogu incident occurred in the summer of 1994 in the Red Star subdivision of Wuchang, Heilongjiang province, and remains the most significant and well-documented physical encounter case in Chinese history. Often referred to as China's Roswell, the event began when Meng Jiaogu, a forest worker and a colleague, spotted a strange metallic object shimmering on the slopes of Phoenix Mountain. Upon attempting to approach the craft a few days later, Meng claimed that he was struck by a bolt of light that knocked him unconscious. The incident escalated into a series of alleged, intimate encounters where Meng described being visited in his home by a 10-foot tall, 6-fingered female entity. Now, for those familiar with the Nephilim, that might ring a few bells. 10-foot tall, 6 fingers, braided fur on her legs. Some people like them rugged. Unlike many Western abduction stories, Meng's account was remarkably, tactile, we'll say. He claimed to have been physically levitated through his roof and engaged in a sexual encounter with the entity, which he believed was part of a cosmic hybridization program, as these things usually tend to be. In the years following the event, the incident underwent an unprecedented level of official scrutiny. The China UFO Research Association, or KUFA, which at the time operated with a degree of state tolerance probably is even stretching it, they dispatched a team of scientists and investigators to Phoenix Mountain. Meng was subjected to medical exams, stress tests, and even a police-administered polygraph, which he reportedly passed. And while skeptics point to possible sleep paralysis, as they always do, a sleep paralysis episode or a localized psychological break of some sort, The physical evidence, including strange markings on Ming's body and reports from dozens of other forest workers who claim to have seen this shimmering craft on the mountainside, kept the case in the public eye. The Purple Mountain Observatory maintained a cautious distance, but the case was extensively covered by the state-run Xinhua news agency, cementing it as a foundational myth of the Chinese high strangeness canon. The cult-like activity, quote-unquote cult-like activity, that formed in the wake of the incident was not a single organized group, but a fragmented movement known as the Phoenix Mountain Awakened. These followers viewed Ming not as a victim, but as a chosen intermediary for a superior race of extraterrestrials. Gotta watch out when you start throwing those kind of phrases around. Superior race. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, small clusters of believers began making unauthorized pilgrimages to the Red Star Forest, often engaging in signal-seeking rituals where they would attempt to telepathically contact the mothercraft. This activity eventually caught the attention of the Ministry of State Security, or MSS. Oh, so close to MSG. Wasn't so bad. This was during the broader Qigong fever crackdown. While Ming himself remained largely humble and reclusive, the group surrounding his story began incorporating interstellar salvation doctrines, which is a big no-no as far as the government's concerned, claiming the entities from the Phoenix Mountain were returning to purify the human genome. Why does it always turn to these just very disturbing, little too close for comfort, Nazi-like allegations and ideas, etc.? Anywho, purify the human genome, a narrative that the state eventually labeled as a potential Zhizhao, or evil cult, threat. The Ming Zhaogu incident has been revitalized, of sorts, in a way, by the Star Spirit Society and other online UAP forums and groups. These modern groups argue that the 30-year anniversary of the event, which was in 2024, served as some sort of activation trigger for the recently passing spring equinox events. They believe that the hybrid child that Ming claimed was conceived during his 1994 encounter is now an adult living within the quote-unquote mirror dimension, and that during the spring equinox, this individual was to act as some biological key to open the gateway over Phoenix Mountain. Now, while the PLA's UAI task force maintains a standard surveillance post near Wuchang to monitor for high-altitude drones, the area remains a primary site of starseed fever, we'll say, with believers convinced that the architects are finally returning to the spot where they first made contact with a Chinese citizen. But yeah, that's one of the more very, very well-known Chinese cases of alien abduction. It's probably the top of the pops as far as any story like this coming out of China goes. Coffee. Now, I wanted to turn our attention to the Lop Nur Desert area, located in the eastern Tarim basin of Xinjiang. It's arguably the most sensitive and anomalous geographic zone in China. It's known as the Ear of the Desert due to its distinctive spiral shape when viewed from satellite imagery. Once a massive saltwater lake that vanished in the 1970s, leaving behind a salt-encrusted wasteland. In the world of high strangeness, Lop Nur is synonymous with the double fish mystery, an alleged 1980s incident involving the disappearance of renowned scientist Peng Zhamu. This is a real case. Peng Zhamu, actual scientist, actually disappeared in the desert. According to alleged leaked Bureau 749 dossiers and persistent digital folklore, Peng's team discovered an ancient trans-medium artifact, some sort of jade pendant that looked like two fish. One fish, two fish, jade fish, blue fish. Who blue fish? This pendant allegedly possessed the ability to mirror or clone biological matter, leading to reports of duplicated personnel and subsequent military lockdown of the entire basin. This is definitely where we're getting into urban legend territory. The region serves as China's primary nuclear testing site, Base 21, which provides a terrestrial explanation for its high security, but also fuels theories regarding radioactive spatiotemporal rifts. Researchers in the quote-unquote awakener community argue that The hundreds of underground nuclear detonations conducted between 1964 and 1996 did more than test weaponry. They believe that the intense energy burst punctured the local atmospheric fabric. Very akin to the whole Jack Parsons meets atomic tests in the desert, sort of opening the doorway for modern UFO flaps, but that kind of disregards the entire pre-modern history of, UAP sightings, etc. But this story is used to explain the recurring reports of phantom convoys. These are visual and radar signatures of 1960s era military trucks appearing in the salt flats, which some categorize as either time slips or lithospheric playbacks, stone tape memory type shit going on here, where the mineral-rich ground acts as a recording medium for past events, or it could just be actual convoys moving secretly through the night. It's probably, I would put my money on that. Another pillar of Lop Nor's high strangeness is the luminous moving sands. Nomadic guides and modern explorers have documented sand rivers, quote-unquote sand rivers, that appear to flow uphill and emit a low-frequency hum, similar to the mechanical rhythms reported in the another incident known as the Kaiyuan incident. Ufologists from the Celestial Witness Union, quote-unquote Celestial Witness Union, alleged UAP hobby group, speculate that these sands are infused with monoatomic gold, or ancient nanotech debris, acting as a living security system for the subterranean Silk Road, a theoretical network of tunnels believed to connect Lop Nor to the Kunlun Mountains. This is reinforced by the 1990s gray dust reports, where localized clouds of metallic particles were said to disable the electronic systems of any unauthorized vehicles entering the dead zone. Culturally, Lop Nor is the site of the ancient Lulan Kingdom, which vanished mysteriously centuries ago. Archaeological finds in the area, such as the Beauty of Lulan mummy, exhibited Western features that have long puzzled historians. But in the Star Spirit Society, another one of these alleged groups, these are viewed as evidence of a progenitor race that utilized Lop Nor as a primary docking station of sorts. Very Anunnaki-type vibes going on with this story. As of the spring equinox, the region remains a sort of black hole for civilian GPS and satellite tracking, while the PLA's Western Theater Command attributes this to ongoing electronic warfare testing. Followers of the Qinghai uplink believe that the ear of the desert is currently acting as a massive acoustic receiver turned to the specific frequency of the spring equinox events. Another high strangeness area is the Taklamakan Desert. Taklamakan? Taklamakan. Taklamakan Desert. The Taklamakan Desert, while often overshadowed by the nuclear-tinged mysteries of neighboring Lop Nor, is considered a distinct somatic and temporal hotspot within the Chinese high strangeness community. Its name frequently translates as the place of no return, and is apparently viewed by the hyperdimensional evidence hunters, another one of these alleged UFO hobbyist groups, as a literal description of its gravitational well properties. Unlike the metallic industrial anomalies of the Northeast, the Taklamakan Desert is defined by phantasmagoria of the sands, as they call it, where the sheer scale of the shifting dunes is said to create a liquid reality. Travelers and modern geological surveyors have reported non-Euclidean topography, some H.P. Lovecraft type shit going on, where GPS coordinates remain static, but the physical landscape appears to stretch, leading to accounts of expeditions traveling for days only to find themselves back at their original starting point, a phenomenon local legend attributes to the desert's breath, but which researchers at the 507 Institute once investigated as localized spatiotemporal curvature. The most persistent physical anomaly in the Taklamakan Desert is the Sigging Sands of Nia. While booming dunes are documented acoustic phenomena caused by friction between sand grains, the sounds near the ruins of the Nia or Jingzhou Kingdom are described as distinctly synthesized and or orchestral. According to leaked Bureau 749 files, these acoustic bursts are often preceded by the appearance of mirage cities, highly detailed three-dimensional projections of ancient Silk Road architecture that appear in the middle of the desert. Unlike standard atmospheric mirages, these Lulon projections have been reported to show heat signatures on infrared sensors, leading to the theory that the Taklamakan Desert high quartz sands acts as a natural holographic projector of sorts, storing and replaying light data from centuries past when triggered by specific solar or magnetic conditions. There's also the moving statues of the Taklamakan Desert. While rooted in the archaeological discoveries of the Jiaohe wooden figurines, these have a much darker sublayer in civilian awakener lore. Beyond the static artifacts found by one Sir R.L. Stein, not to be confused with R.L. Stein of Goosebumps fame, there are accounts from the 1990s Qigong fever era of animate terrapins, stone or wooden carvings found in buried temples that supposedly shift their gaze or change their hand gestures or mudras when observers aren't looking. In the Star Spirit Society, these are seen not as ghosts, but as sort of biomechanical sentinels left behind by the quote-unquote architects to guard the subsand gateways into potential subterranean valleys, hidden kingdoms, etc. These reports are often linked to the blue firebugs of the desert, luminous insect-like orbs that swarm around the statues and are said to disable the flashlights and cameras of anyone attempting to document any kind of movement on the statue's part. Very weird, very strange. Now, we're going to start. Those are like two examples of the concentrated hotspots of high strangeness within China. It's odd that they're both in the desert, but deserts have long been known throughout many folklores and many cultures and many histories as being, since they're barren and they're the gathering place of spirits, etc. So jibes well with everything else that many different cultures have said sort of occur in the desert at night. But now we're getting into more. These are going to be more definitely on the urban legend side. We've got a few that are historically noted, and one that I'm going to have to come back and do a whole episode on one particular historical incident because I didn't know the level of, I hesitate to say awesome, because it was a bloody revolution of sorts, but there was some craziness taking place that I did not know about, and I'm sure there's several awesome movies on it that I'm going to have to hunt down, but moving on. So first up, we've got the 1995 Beijing Bus 375 incident. This is also known as the last bus to Fragrant Hills. This is a very popular urban legend in China, one of their most enduring urban legends that blends elements of traditional ghost stories with a more modern, high strangeness mystery. So according to the most common narrative, on the night of November 14th, 1995, the last bus for Route 375, which used to be, oddly enough, a bus route that I would take quite often, not the one in China, but, transposed over here, it departed the Yuan terminus, heading toward the Fragrant Hills area. The bus reportedly picked up 3 mysterious passengers dressed in traditional Qing Dynasty robes, so roughly late 1800s to, I believe, 1930s era. And 2 men were supporting a third who reportedly had a pale face between them. The incident gained legendary status after an elderly woman on the bus allegedly saved a young man's life by faking a fight over a stolen wallet to get him off the bus, later claiming she saw that the robed figures had no feet and were floating above the floor of the bus. The paranormal version of the story focuses on the gruesome discovery that followed. The legend states that Bus 375 failed to report to its final station and was found days later submerged in the Mian Reservoir, nearly 100 kilometers away from its intended route. The high strangeness details cited in this version include that the fuel tank, upon further inspection, was allegedly found filled with fresh blood rather than gasoline. Kramer, accelerated decomposition. Although the bus had only been missing for 2 days, the bodies of the driver, conductor, and an unidentified passenger were reportedly in a state of advanced decomposition that usually takes weeks, defying the standard forensic timelines for such events. And the invisible transit Despite the massive distance to the reservoir, investigators allegedly found no footage of the bus on any security cameras along the highway, as if the vehicle had traveled through some kind of blind spot in reality. There's also a ufological / interdimensional version of this story, favored by modern hyperdimensional evidence hunters types in the Awakeners community, who reinterpret the event as some sort of time slip. So in this framework, the Qing Dynasty clothing is not seen as a ghostly costume, but as a symptom of some kind of temporal rift where individuals from the 19th century were momentarily displaced into 1995. Proponents of this theory argue that the blood, quote-unquote blood, in the fuel tank was a biological byproduct of a failed transmedium transition, where the molecular structure of the bus and its occupants was compromised during a jump between dimensions. Basically, the plot of the movie The Fly, except with a bus full of people. So they just got, like, mashed up, basically, into some disgusting Lovecraftian fleshmobile. The Awakener communities on platforms like Weibo and WeChat use the Bus 375 story as a warning for various potential time slip mishaps that could occur. Things that people don't really attribute often to stories of time slips. Multiple objects and or individuals colliding and being essentially just merged or meshed into a single horrific entity of some sort. Now, there's also the steel-skinned entity of Kaiyuan. This is something I mentioned offhand earlier. This took place in 1993, allegedly. The steel-skinned entity of Kaiyuan occurred in the summer of 1993 in the Liaoning province. It's one of the more mechanically bizarre close encounters of the third kind type cases in the Chinese high strangeness documents, archives, etc. The incident centered on a local man named Wang Qing, who claimed to have encountered a non-human entity, and it said to him, "Everybody Wang Qing tonight." Nope, sorry. I just couldn't resist. Okay. He encountered a non-humanoid entity while walking near a rural construction site at twilight. Unlike the ethereal light beings or gray alien archetypes common in Western ufology, Wang described a figure that appeared entirely industrial or metallic in nature. Now, these aren't totally unfounded. You hear cases like this. There's one that occurred in London, I believe. There's one that occurred in Alabama, the Alabama Metal Man. There's a couple of incidents like this out of South America where metal people have been encountered in just in high strangeness situations. So it's not totally unheard of. But the high strangeness of the Kaiyuan encounter deepened when Wang attempted to communicate with the entity. And he claimed that as he approached, the entity did not speak, but emitted a series of mechanical rhythmic pulses that felt like physical vibrations in his chest, which a lot of cryptid / humanoid encounters, this also happens a lot. You get the resonating in the chest. My own potential cryptid encounter, I had something very much like this. Whatever noise they're making, I don't know if it's like an infrasound thing, but it resonates in the chest. And it's very destabilizing in the moment that it's happening. But he said that it didn't walk with a human gait. Instead, its legs seemed to slide across the ground with a sort of hissing sound, reminiscent of pneumatic pistons. Wang reported that the entity was holding a small crystalline rod that it used to scan a pile of scrap metal and discarded rebar. When Wang moved closer, the entity reportedly pointed the rod at the ground, creating a sort of localized gravity distortion field that caused the dust and small stones to hover several inches in the air before the entity vanished into a blur of motion toward a nearby wooded ravine. Following the report, the Liaoning UFO Research Branch conducted an on-site investigation, and while they found no quote-unquote mothership or landing gear indentations, they did document a series of unusual molecularly sheared metal scraps at the construction site. Several pieces of rebar appeared to have been sliced with such precision that the edges were smooth at a microscopic level, a feat that would have required industrial laser equipment not present at the rural site in 1993. This led to the theory that the steel-skinned entity was not a biological alien, but a remote autonomous drone of some sort, or a von Neumann machine designed to harvest terrestrial raw materials for repair or for data collection, I guess would be the best way to put it. But apparently there were several quote-unquote Iron Men sightings, copyright TM, throughout China in the early 1990s, or steel-skinned, industrialized-looking entities. There was one in northeast Dongbei, region known as China's Rust Belt. There was apparently a string of sightings like this. I guess the other one was in Taiwan as well. Just a short, quick sighting made by someone else, possibly of the same incident. Next up, we've got the Glass-Eyed Men of Harbin. This supposedly took place in 1994. Appearing in the winter of 1994, just prior to a panic caused by an incident we'll cover here just in a moment. But this represents a rare Chinese case of the quote-unquote Men in Black phenomenon. According to reports collected by the Heilongjiang UFO Research Society, several residents in the Nangang district claim to have been approached by pairs of unusually tall men dressed in identical heavy gray overcoats and fur hats. Despite the sub-zero Harbin temperatures, witnesses noted that these men did not appear to breathe out condensation and moved with a stiff, synchronized gait. That's a very specific thing to take note of. Very strange. The most unsettling feature, however, was their eyes, they said. Observers described them as having glass-like or crystalline surfaces with no visible pupils or irises, reflecting the surrounding snow and streetlights with a disturbing high-definition clarity that suggested a non-biological origin. The high strangeness of the encounters often involved direct neural intrusion or telepathic intrusion. One primary witness, a local factory clerk, claimed that when one of these glass-eyed men looked at him, he experienced a sudden sharp static in his ears and a series of rapid-fire mental images of geometric shapes and mathematical equations. These men reportedly did not speak with their mouths, but produced a low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate the surrounding air. When the witnesses attempted to follow them into an alleyway, he reported that the men did not turn a corner, but simply just faded into the mist, just whoosh, gone. They left behind no footprints in the snow, a detail that has led the quote-unquote hyperdimensional evidence hunters group to categorize them as solid holograms or etheric probes. While the Harbin authorities never officially acknowledged the glass-eyed sightings, the reports remain a staple of the Northeast Anomalous Corridor archives. Now, this occurred hot on the heels of a much more, let's say, well-documented case of the Catwoman of Harbin. Not the sexy 1960s Batman Catwoman, but a much more disturbing version. Known as Mao Lian Tai Tai, or Old Lady with a Cat's Face. This is one of the most chilling and pervasive urban legends in Northeast China, peaking in the winter of 1995 into 96. So unlike many high strangeness events that involve crafts or lights, this incident was a quote-unquote biological horror that gripped the city of Harbin and surrounding Heilongjiang province in a state of genuine terror. The legend began with the death of an elderly woman in a rural village who reportedly collapsed while holding her pet cat. According to the folklore, as the cat jumped over her corpse, a quote-unquote breath of life or soul transfer occurred, causing the woman to sit bolt upright with her face partially transformed into that of a feline, complete with fur, slit pupils, and predatory fangs. The high strangeness of the Harbin incident lies in the speed and scale of the mass hysteria it triggered. Within weeks, reports surfaced across Harbin of a creature that could leap onto the roofs of houses and moved with supernatural agility. The legend claimed that the quote-unquote Catwoman possessed a specific hunger for children, leading to a citywide crisis. In the winter of 1995, Harbin schools were reportedly placed on high alert. Students were forbidden from walking home alone, and many were told to wear a red string or a piece of red cloth around their necks or wrists, as the creature was said to be repelled by the color red. The color red is very prominent in Chinese spirituality. It has a lot of symbology attached to it, especially when it comes to ghosts and involvement with the afterlife, etc. This mirrors the vampire granny panic that occurred in Shanghai during the same period, suggesting a sort of cross-provincial synchronicity of child safety fears in the mid-1990s. As most of my listeners probably know, when it comes to urban legends, there's usually a very base societal fear, or there's a moral to the story, I guess you'd call it. But there's always some underlying nugget of truth, something that happened that sort of spread out and caused these things. So while the paranormal narrative focused on soul leaping, the ufological and somatic interpretation favored by the researchers of 749 Institute, Bureau 749, etc., the 507 Institute, I believe it was, explored more fringe possibilities. These theories suggested that the quote-unquote Catwoman was not a ghost, but a failed biological experiment or a victim of a localized genetic mutation of some sort caused by illegal chemical dumping in the industrial Northeast. Some quote-unquote hyperdimensional evidence hunters have even proposed that the entity was a quote-unquote skinwalker-type entity, some kind of shape-shifting entity that had mimicked a local resident and a domestic animal simultaneously, resulting in some distorted hybrid form. The persistent rumors that the PLA was eventually called in to eliminate the creature with a sniper shot to the back of the head added a layer of state-sponsored containment to the myth. Very SCP Foundation type stuff going on. The official response from the Harbin authorities was to dismiss the entire event as a rumor started by superstitious villagers. Local newspapers published editorials urging the public not to believe in feudal superstitions, yet the psychological impact was so profound that even decades later, the mention of Mao Lian Tai Tai can evoke a visceral reaction in those who grew up in Harbin during that era. Sociologically, the incident is viewed as a Cold War-style panic, reflecting the deep-seated anxieties of a population living in a harsh industrial environment where the quote-unquote old ways of folklore were crashing into the new world of rapid development. To this day, the Harbin Catwoman remains the definitive biological boogeyman of Chinese high strangeness. There's also the mechanical possession cases of the late 90s. Or these were centered primarily in the industrial hubs of Liaoning and Shandong provinces, and they remain one of the most disturbing chapters of Chinese somatic science history. Unlike traditional folklore involving spirit possession, these incidents involved individuals, typically factory workers or machinery technicians, who claimed that their bodies were being quote-unquote overwritten by a digital or mechanical intelligence, an artificial intelligence perhaps. The most famous case involved a lathe operator in Shenyang who, after a localized power surge in his workshop, began speaking in a rapid-fire, binary-like cadence and demonstrated an intuitive, superhuman understanding of complex Boolean logic and advanced calculus, despite having no prior education in these mathematical fields. Witnesses reported that his movements became rigid and hydraulic, mimicking the frame rate displacement seen in UAP sightings, as if his motor functions were being slaved to an external processor. The high strangeness of these cases was documented by researchers from Bureau 749 and the 507 Institute, who categorized the phenomenon as information-based infiltration. They observed that the victims often developed a temporary metallic skin conductivity, where their bodies could act as human antennae, picking up high-frequency radio bursts that were not present on standard civilian bands. During clinical observation, one subject reportedly output a series of complex technical schematics for a non-linear propulsion system by scratching them into a metal table with his fingernails, exerting a force that should have been physically impossible for human bone or keratin. This led to the chilling theory of technological parasitism, where an advanced non-biological intelligence was using the human nervous system as a temporary biological hard drive to store or transmit data that could not survive the electromagnetic noise of our atmosphere. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this one's probably bullshit. This is definitely in the urban legend category. However, the idea of AI possession or mental control by some sort of technological intelligence. Obviously, once again, this is very much seated in real world fears. The more advanced that AI gets, it's going to birth a lot of stories like this. However, if people who don't really use AI on a regular basis, I would say go talk to ChatGPT for just a few minutes, and I think some of your fears will be assuaged. It's not that great. I mean, they get shit wrong all the time. So, as a matter of fact, I think that might be I don't know. I'm not going to get into my total deep AI theories here, but I think there's a distinct campaign of sorts to instill within civilization a learned helplessness, like especially reliance on technology. We got to know how to grow food and shit. Like, if you don't know already, you need to start learning some shit. Like, get a garden going. Just don't become reliant on technology is all I'm saying. And that's the underlying fear of sort of stories like this. Now, there is a weird addendum to this story from a former Falun Gong practitioner who claimed that during a deep state meditation session, they saw, quote unquote, microscopic silver spiders crawling all over their skin. The practitioner believed that these were alien nanobots, though they used more spiritual terms at the time, designed to rewrite their DNA. And they claimed that the only way to shake them off was to visualize the Falun, or the law wheel, the Dharma wheel, spinning at high speeds to grind the invaders into dust. And this highlights the technophobia that defined 1990s Chinese paranormal movements.
Oh, wow! Technophobia!
The account of the microscopic silver spiders is conceptually linked to the mechanical possession era in Chinese urban legends, but it represents the sort of spiritual somatic branch of the phenomena rather than the purely industrial one. And while the mechanical possession cases in factories were often viewed as sudden accidental system errors triggered by machinery or electromagnetic surges, the accounts within the Falun Gong and broader Qigong or Qigong movements of the late 90s were interpreted through a lens of cultivation or interdimensional interference, especially when it came to Falun Gong practitioners, as essentially covert alien invasion is a part of their theology, more or less. So probably the part they don't really talk about. I haven't seen that Shenyun dance extravaganza special show that they put on, but I kind of really want to now, just to see if there's some sort of covert alien invasion subtext to the story going on. I mean, I already know they talk about the Red Demon, which is obviously the CCP. I'm not mincing fucking words there, are they? But yeah, there's apparently a whole subset, a subgenre of Chinese urban legends that had to do, in this particular era in the 90s, that had to do with things like mechanical possession. Like, once again, just sort of AI or digital consciousness, sort of basically an updated techno version of spirit or demonic possession, which we'll get into the OG version here in just a moment. Okay. Another famous urban legend, although this one is considered a little more, I hesitate to say real, but it's viewed with a bit more cachet to it than a everyday regular old urban legend. This is the teleportation. This is the teleportation of Huang Yangqiu from 1977, and this is considered a sort of time slip / glitch in the Matrix type story, but this is investigated heavily by both local police and paranormal researchers. A young farmer from Hebei named Huang Yangqiu vanished from his bed overnight, only to reappear 1,000 kilometers away in Nanjing just hours later, a journey that would have taken days by train at the time. What makes it unsettling isn't just the distance, but the humanoid entities that were involved, his traveling companions. Huang claimed that On 3 separate occasions, he was carried across China by 2 mysterious men who claimed to be high-speed brothers. Quote, high-speed brothers. Cool techno garage band name. During the 3rd disappearance, Huang traveled to 9 different cities in 8 days. He described the men as appearing mostly human, but possessing an uncanny robotic efficiency. They never seemed to eat or sleep, and they could bypass military checkpoints and high security zones, like an artillery division in Shanghai, for example, simply by walking through them as if they were invisible. When the alleged Bureau 749 researchers later interviewed the guards at these bases, many vaguely recalled seeing quote-unquote soldiers who didn't belong, but their memories were hazy and fragmented. The incident remains a sort of cornerstone of Chinese teleportation lore, of which there is quite a bit, actually, suggesting a hidden class of humanoids living among the population with the ability to manipulate space and time and or human perception. Yes, there is indeed quite a bit of Chinese teleportation lore. In fact, I've recommended it several times, but if you haven't listened to it, go back and check out my Chinese government parapsychology episode. That's stuff that's a lot more multi-attribution, many sources claiming that this stuff kind of took place. It's all like if you follow or are familiar with America's remote viewing program, things like that. You know, I've covered Russia and China's version of this because we hear so much about America's governmental research into, you know, potential psychic abilities, etc., superhuman abilities, things like that. But you never really hear what the other guys were doing at this time. And that's one of the main reasons I wanted to put those episodes out. So check those out if you haven't yet. Now, I mentioned, I believe, in the first episode of this 3-part series that Li Hongzhi, the founder of Falun Gong, said that these aliens who are allegedly infiltrating society and trying to make us reliant on technology, they had bone noses, which I'm still having trouble, like, picturing to a degree. I'm not quite sure what these are supposed to look like, but apparently there was a case of bone-nosed entities during the 1981 spiral wave. July 24th, 1981, millions of people across 14 Chinese provinces witnessed a massive glowing spiral in the sky. I believe I covered this in the first episode as well. While the public focused on the lights, several obscure reports from rural Sichuan described humanoid, quote-unquote, ground crews seen shortly after the spirals vanished. Local witnesses reported seeing tall, thin figures in seamless gray suits standing in the middle of rice paddies. Unlike the typical Western gray alien, these beings were described as having elongated skeletal faces, where the nose appeared to be a protruding ridge of exposed bone rather than soft tissue. Witnesses claimed the entities didn't speak, but emitted a low-frequency humming that caused physical nausea and nosebleeds to anyone who got within 50 meters. Most disturbing were the accounts from local livestock farmers who found their cattle standing in a trance-like state for days after the encounters. The animals refused to eat and eventually died of what military doctors, likely from the nearby research institutes, tentatively labeled as acute cellular exhaustion, quote-unquote. Acute cellular exhaustion. This case is often cited by various UFO researchers as evidence that the 1981 spiral wave incident wasn't just a sighting, but a massive biological seeding or harvesting operation. Now, this next incident was very hesitant to include because it's a true crime incident, but and I have no doubt in my mind that it's not even a true crime incident. I think I include it because I want to have an illustration to show how quickly an occult urban legend or hysteria, just mass hysteria, basically, can be attached to a tragic incident. This is known as the Chongqing Red Boy incident, or the boy in the red dress incident. Now, to give you the particulars, this is widely considered one of the most disturbing unsolved, quote-unquote, unsolved mysteries in China. I don't think there's really a lot you be the judge. I'll just tell you the story. So, November 2009, a 13-year-old boy named Kwang Ji was found dead in his home in rural Chongqing. The scene was bizarre, and it felt staged as some kind of ritualistic event, which, I mean, to a degree, it is, but you'll see why. The boy was hanging from a wooden beam. His hands and feet were tied with professional knots. Like, by professional knots, they mean, like complicated knots. He was wearing a bright red dress and a pair of female swimsuits underneath. A heavy iron weight was tied to his feet, and a small, precise hole had been made in the top of his forehead. Now, that last particular bit of detail, the small hole in his forehead, this is a bone of contention among many people who've researched this case. Some say that was just tacked on by the urban legend that grew around this, but I don't know. Some people say it was in the police report. Some people say it's not. So that's one of the first major bones of contention here. There were no signs of struggle or external bruising that would suggest a typical murder or foul play. But after the discovery of this boy's corpse, essentially, paranormal investigators and local folklore experts suggested that this was a quote-unquote soul-snatching ritual. So in some dark Taoist traditions, red is used to lock a soul in the body, while the iron weights were to prevent the soul from ascending. And the forehead hole allows the essence to be harvested. This has also been compared thematically and structurally to the Tibetan Powa or Fowa technique of soul transfer. The theory is that a sorcerer, quote-unquote sorcerer, killed the boy to use his soul as a guai, or a servant spirit, which we'll get into more stories of this as well, to extend their own life, essentially. So despite a massive investigation, police eventually ruled it an accidental death, what American police would probably rule death by misadventure. The main theory is that this was accidental death due to autoerotic asphyxiation, a conclusion that the public, and especially the boy's family, found very deeply unconvincing. So in addition to much of the occult speculation surrounding this case, the boy's mother also claims that prior to the discovery of her son's body, the son lived separately from his parents. A lot of people in rural China have a living situation like that, especially students, because the schools, the academies are, far from these rural homestead areas. So the boy's mother claims that prior to the discovery of her son being dead in his body, she'd been awoken in the middle of the night by a dream in which she'd seen a shadowy entity, shaped like a man, a shadow person, basically just bash its way into the house through the back door and just forced itself into the house via a heavily obstructed back door in real life. This too would further lend to the parents' belief that their son had met with some particularly dark form of foul play. The reason I was hesitant to include it is because it's just a tragic case of just a young kid getting into the thing, finding out what they like, and unfortunately it ended very badly for them. And I can see that that's the kind of story, especially I think maybe in Chinese culture, that really makes people uncomfortable. And so attaching this story of dark Taoist black magic to it is kind of a way to deal, I guess, to not feel so icky and creeped out by what actually happened, and just, yeah. So next up, this is another major urban legend that is a bone of contention as to whether this really happened or not. This is the 1995 Chengdu zombie outbreak. This is the ultimate modern Chinese urban legend. This is right up there with the bus 753 or whatever it was, as a top contender for most popular. So during a massive excavation during the Funan River in Chengdu, Workers reportedly unearthed 3 ancient Qing dynasty sarcophagi. Unlike typical archaeological finds, these corpses were allegedly very well preserved and had yellow Taoist talismans pinned to their foreheads. Legend says that the corpses disappeared from a local lab, followed by reports of stiff-moving people, quote-unquote stiff-moving people, attacking citizens along the river. The panic was so intense that the military was reportedly deployed with flamethrowers to quote-unquote sanitize the area. The official government explanation was an outbreak of rabies among local village dogs. However, to this day, Chengdu locals of that generation whisper about the zombie incident and the secret military unit, sometimes called Code 701, that was sent to dispose of the bodies. So the alleged Chengdu zombie outbreak of 1995 is another entry into the catalog of late 20th century Chinese high strangeness stories that circulates widely online, but definitely collapses under scrutiny when traced back to any kind of records. In the case of Chengdu in 1995, there's no verified documentation in public health records, police reports, or mainstream Chinese media archives describing any outbreak involving reanimated corpses, contagious zombie-like behavior, or coordinated violent incidents matching the modern internet legend. Instead, what exists is a retroactively constructed narrative that appears to have been assembled from unrelated threads such as public anxiety about infectious diseases, isolated violent incidents, and the global pop cultural vocabulary of zombies that was already well established in Western media by the 1990s. In its most common internet-era form, the story describes a sudden series of events in which individuals in or around Chengdu allegedly began exhibiting aggressive, unresponsive, or trance-like behavior, sometimes framed as infected or reanimated, prompting emergency containment measures or military involvement. Some versions claim hospital lockdowns, unexplained deaths, or disappearances of medical staff. Others escalate further, suggesting that bodies in morgues showed post-mortem movement or that individuals returned from clinical death in a disoriented, hostile state. However, these details are inconsistent across retellings and don't align with any known epidemiological or governmental incidents from the period. Why such a story might arise? Well, it's important to situate 1990s China within real historical context. The mid-1990s were a period of rapid urbanization and medical modernization, but also a lingering public anxiety about infectious diseases, particularly following global awareness of HIV/AIDS, a tuberculosis resurgence in some regions, and general concerns about hospital capacity in a rapid growing area like Chengdu. In such environments, rumors of mysterious illness outbreaks could spread quickly, especially in the absence of transparent, real-time public health communication systems compared to today's standards. At the same time, the zombie framework itself is almost certainly a sort of post-cultural import. The modern cinematic zombie archetype, derived from Haitian folklore but heavily reshaped by 20th century Western horror film and literature, didn't become a globally ubiquitous phenomenon until the 80s and 90s. So by the time internet folklore communities began assembling lists of Chinese mysteries in the 2000s, the zombie trope was already a well-established shorthand for uncontrolled bodies, contagion panics, and systematic breakdown. It's likely that unrelated incidents involving violence, mental illness, or medical emergencies were later reinterpreted through this sort of narrative lens. There's also the recognizable pattern in how these stories are structured. The 1995 Chengdu zombie outbreak narrative often borrows elements from real categories of events such as hospital overcrowding, unexplained deaths, isolated criminal cases, or rumor-driven panic, and sort of reassembles them into a semi-coherent but fictional epidemic arc. And this is a classical feature of retrospective urban legends and information movement, essentially. Disparate facts being reorganized into a single causal event or unified incident that feels plausible precisely because it draws on recognizable institutional settings and failures within hospitals, morgues, quarantine zones, etc. I'm surprised we didn't hear more of this during COVID, like things of this nature. I mean, I know I heard some stories kind of similar to this. There was all kinds of shit like certain vaccines growing worms in your body, etc., things like that. So, I mean, this stuff still happened. It's prominent to this day. However, when looking into this incident, this actually has a bit of a weird prehistory to it. So in the early 1900s, there was a real practice called driving corpses in Jiang. Professional corpse drivers, quote-unquote corpse drivers, would transport the bodies of laborers who died far from home back to their ancestral villages. They traveled at night to avoid the sun and the sight of the living. Now, when I say corpse drivers, you're probably getting an image of a guy who transports dead bodies. No, this is a real-life eerie profession that is the direct source of the Jiangxi urban legends and myths, especially behind the Chengdu zombie outbreak. Jiangxi is like the Chinese equivalent of vampires / zombies, the hopping corpses, basically. And there's actually, in China and Tibet, there's a rich history of architecture and just myth and folklore that suggests that there may have been some sort of actual events like this. There's buildings specifically throughout Tibet and areas of China close to Tibet that are built specifically architectural flourishes to the buildings, especially to entryways that are meant to prevent these hopping corpses, quote unquote hopping corpses or zombies, from getting into buildings. So at least that's the explanation given behind a lot of certain architectural specifications for certain buildings. And we're going to get into some other weird architectural specifications that are based in reality that are absolutely fucking crazy. But yeah, the practice of corpse driving, like this is just a dude who, like a Taoist magician of sorts, who would basically like reanimate the corpses and make them walk in procession behind him or in front of him. I would have them walk in front of me. I'm not walking with these fucking things behind me. But this is perhaps one of the more visceral traditions in Chinese history, originating in the rugged, fog-shrouded mountains of the Jiangxi region of Hunan province. So while Western observers often dismissed it as pure superstition or a clever ruse by smugglers, various researchers throughout the 1980s treated it as a primitive yet highly effective form of quote-unquote kinetic resonance. That's how they viewed it through the communist 1980s scientific viewpoint as opposed to Taoist magic. The practice was born from a grim necessity, the belief that a person's soul could only find peace if buried in their ancestral home, even if they died hundreds of miles away in a labor camp or on a battlefield. The actual driving was performed by specialized Taoist priests, often referred to as corpse drivers or ganshi Jiang. According to historical accounts and early 20th century ethnographic studies, the ritual was never performed during the day. These caravans of the dead moved only at night to avoid the yang energy of the sun, which is said to dissolve the binding spells needed to keep them in line. Witness accounts from the early 1900s describe a line of corpses wrapped in yellow ritual paper and bamboo mats, moving with a stiff, rhythmic hopping motion. Skeptics often claim the corpses were actually tied to long, flexible bamboo poles carried by two living men, creating an optical illusion of, self-propelled corpses, basically. But research into this suggests that these priests apparently utilized more scientifically based research into these stories, come to the conclusion that these priests utilized low-frequency chanting and bells to create a localized, quote-unquote, vibrational field that allowed these cadavers to maintain a state of unstable mobility. The lead driver would ring a bronze bell to warn villagers to stay indoors. Seeing a driven corpse was considered an omen of extreme misfortune. So yellow Taoist talismans, or fu, were affixed to the foreheads of the deceased, allegedly acting as a sort of somatic anchor to keep the lingering Po, or physical soul, tethered to the nervous system. Researchers from 507 Institute or Bureau 749 allegedly theorized that the specific mineral composition of the soil from Shangxi combined with the priest's rhythmic acoustic triggers could actually stimulate the residual bioelectricity in a fresh corpse. And they viewed corpse driving not as magic, but as an early intuitive form of neuromuscular hijacking. So this is their parapsychology / psychotronic look at how this might work. They conducted a series of quote-unquote field retrievals, allegedly, in Hunan to study the remnants of this practice. They were less interested in the folklore and more interested in the, quote, post-mortem nerve conductance, unquote. This is their alleged scientific explanation behind the folklore. There's alleged decomposition logs from the early Republican era of China. It's just funny to say. This is the late 1800s to the 1930s, I believe, the Qing Dynasty era, documenting cases where driven corpses allegedly exhibited autonomous reflexes when the ritual bells were rung, even after weeks of travel. And this data was reportedly used to develop certain code protocols for dealing with reanimated dead people, reanimation anomalies, such as the alleged 1995 Chengdu zombie outbreak incident. Rumors persist that the last true corpse drivers were recruited into the early foundations of groups like Bureau 749. Their knowledge of corpse preservation and post-mortem mobility was repurposed for deep cover logistics and the containment of biological anomalies. This has also been called, aside from corpse driving, it's also been called Jiang capturing or corpse transportation. It's one of the most enduring but sensationalized motifs associated with Chinese esoteric religion. It's also one of the most misunderstood and heavily mythologized practices attributed to Taoist ritual specialists. The modern image of Taoist priests hopping reanimated corpses or jiangshi across the countryside using bells and talismans is largely a 19th and 20th century folkloric construction shaped by travel literature, regional storytelling traditions, and later Hong Kong horror cinema, which has done more than any other source in shaping the popular viewpoints of alleged Taoist black magic practices, etc. The term is most often associated with real-world corpse transportation, depending on the regional usage and transcription problems. But in late imperial southern China, especially in Hunan, Hubei, and parts of Sichuan, there were documented professional practices involving the transport of the dead over long distances when families couldn't afford or arrange conventional burial in their home village. So in these cases, trained workers would move corpses from distant locations back to ancestral burial grounds. Because the travel was so difficult, bodies were sometimes transported at night, and in some traditions, they were supported upright or guided along paths to avoid contamination or social taboo. This practical reality became the seed for later supernatural reinterpretations. This is one of my favorites. So, this next one, this is a very pan-Asian phenomenon. And we have multiple equivalents in the West to this sort of stuff. But, I don't know, I just find the pan-Asian prominence of this particular phenomenon very intriguing. I don't know, it's something I want to look into deeper and find more specific cases of. I talked about it a little bit in the Occult Crime Atlas Japan episodes, but these are fox demon panics. So in the early 20th century, China was transitioning from an empire to a republic, but the fear of the Huli Jing, or fox spirits, very much remained fresh within everyone's mind. So unlike the cute anime versions of today, 1900s fox spirits were viewed as predatory energy vampires. They could range anywhere from like an amalgamation, I guess, of sorts, from a succubus or incubus to a werewolf. Like there's this energy vampires, etc. Just the sort of cross-cultural mix of monster stories that we know in the West. But in rural northern China, fox panics would occasionally grip entire villages. Men would be found, quote-unquote, wasted away, suffering from a sudden, unexplained illness that looked like tuberculosis but was attributed to a fox spirit disguised as a beautiful woman, sucking the yang out of them. Energy vampires. These cases were often, unfortunately, these cases would unfortunately end in mob violence. It's very much also akin to witch hunt epidemics and panics in the West. These mob-led ritual exorcisms, where suspected fox-possessed individuals, often women with a mental illness or outsiders, it's always the same victims for some reason, were subjected to brutal treatments, including being forced to drink quote-unquote exorcism water made of ash and sulfur, or being beaten with peachwood branches, as peachwood is strongly associated with exorcisms, etc. So these fox demon panics of the early 1900s serves as sort of a gothic chapter in the Qing dynasty, marking the transition where ancient folklore was systematically reclassified as a national security threat. This is when the occult was being refiltered through the perceptual lens of psychology. And these Huli Jing epidemics have been a staple of Chinese culture for millennia. And the turn of the century saw a localized haunting transform into widespread social contagion that the quote-unquote 9 elders, allegedly, of the alleged Bureau 749 were supposedly forced to address before the 1911 revolution. The epicenter of the panic is often centered around the Dongjimin and Dongbianmin watchtowers of the old Beijing city wall. By the early 1900s, these structures had fallen into disrepair, becoming the alleged embassies for fox spirits who had migrated from the northern wilderness to the capital. So in the final decades of the Qing dynasty and the uneasy transition into the early republic, roughly the late 1800s through the first decade of the 1900s. So, sorry, I said earlier the 30s. It was only it was up till 1911 when this republic era transition ended. So, northern China in particular experienced a series of localized moral panics centered on fox spirits that blurred the line between older folk religion and possession cults, because spirit possession isn't necessarily a bad thing in Eastern culture, or only the West and like Christianized society completely views spirit possession as negative. That can't be entirely attributed to Christianity, although that's a big part of it. But we're very all about the individual. We're an individualist, society. So being overtaken or overwhelmed or overrun by something from outside is just not cool to us in a large way. But spirit possession has been a large foundational practice in many religious groups and movements throughout all of history. And even in the West, it goes by different names sometimes, things like theophany, etc. I know, it's funny.
Theo?
But being overcome by an outside spirit, etc. But these blurred the line between older folk religion and possession cults that practiced induced spirit possession for oracular purposes, to sort of, tell the future, divine things, or make sure the crops were going to be great, etc., that babies would be born healthy, and so on and so forth. So in the broader pattern of sorcery scares that periodically convulsed throughout Chinese society at this time, this was lumped in with that. And these episodes didn't emerge out of nowhere. They were the late stage flowering of a very old and deeply strange tradition. For centuries, fox spirits had occupied a dual role in the Chinese imagination, sometimes seductive, dangerous demons capable of possession and social disruption, sometimes as tutelary beings, sages, even objects of household worship. So once again, you have the good and the bad, the yin and the yang side of fox spirits and spirit possession practices. Late imperial literature, like Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio, preserved both sides of this lineage. Stories in which foxes possessed women, ruined families, or required exorcism that sat alongside tales of benevolent fox companions, illustrating how normalized the idea of fox agency and infiltration into human life already was. So by the 19th century, this folkloric substrate had evolved into something more socially volatile. Organized or semi-organized fox cults, or Huishan worship, that involved spirit mediums, household altars, and claims of direct possession or communication. These practices were especially visible in North China, Hebei, Shandong, and around Beijing, where fox spirits were sometimes venerated as aunts or familial protectors, invited into the home and treated as quasi-kin. They were, like family. Olive Garden, were you here? Your fox family. Anyways, at the same time, officials and literati increasingly frame such practices as heterodox, subversive, or oftentimes outright fraudulent. The late Qing dynasty state had a long history of reacting to perceived invisible threats, most famously the soul-stealing panics, which we'll get into in a moment, and fox possession fears slotted neatly into the same psychological and administrative pattern. Rumors spread quickly. Marginal figures like mediums, wandering ritualists, women acting as spirit hosts, etc., became targets, and authorities responded with investigation, suppression, and sometimes violence. The specific fox demon panics of the early 1900s, especially the 1908 scare, often grouped with the last great Qing-era sorcery crises, were characterized by reports that fox spirits were actively possessing people, speaking through them, demanding offerings, and in some cases organizing quasi-religious followings. So in these accounts, possession was not subtle. Victims, often women or socially vulnerable individuals of any kind, would fall into a trance state, speak in altered voices, or claim to channel fox entities who issued commands, diagnosed illnesses, or threatened harm. Local rumor or networks amplified these incidents into regional crises. Officials feared that such cults could destabilize communities or act as a cover for seditious movements, while ordinary people feared illness, misfortune, or spiritual contamination. As in early sorcery scares, accusations could spiral out of control. Someone believed to be hosting a fox spirit might be interrogated, beaten, or forced into exorcism rituals that borderline on fucking torture. What makes the early 20th century cases particularly fascinating is how they sit at the intersection of collapsing cosmologies. On the one hand, you still have very old ritual technologies, exorcists, spirit mediums, and techniques conceptually descended from figures like the Feng Jiangxi, whose role was to expel malevolent spirit entities from homes and human bodies. On the other hand, you have a modernizing state increasingly suspicious of quote-unquote superstition that's attempting to regulate or eliminate precisely these practices. So the result is a feedback loop. Suppression legitimizes the idea that something dangerous is occurring, which in turn fuels further rumor and panic. Individual cases, reconstructed in works like Jiao Fei Kang's The Cult of the Fox, often follow eerily consistent narrative beats. A household begins experiencing disturbances, illness, strange behavior, financial decline. A family member, frequently a young woman, enters trance states and begins speaking as a fox spirit, sometimes identifying itself as a named aunt figure, echoing older folk taxonomies. The possessing entity may demand incense, food offerings, or recognition as a household deity. Neighbors hear of the case, some come seeking cures or blessings, effectively transforming the afflicted home into a micro-shrine. At this point, local authorities or rival ritual specialists intervene. either to expose fraud, perform an exorcism, or suppress what's now perceived as an illicit cult. The resolution varies. Sometimes the fox is expelled, sometimes the medium is punished, and sometimes briefly just dissipates it as quickly as it showed up. It just takes care of itself. What's striking is how closely these real-world panics mirror earlier fictional templates. In stories like Hu Dagu, a fox infiltrates a household, exerts influence, and ultimately requires intervention by a ritual specialist, essentially a narrative blueprint for later lived experiences. By the early 1900s, those narrative structures had become scripts for reality. People knew what fox possession was, what it was supposed to look like, how it behaved, and how it should be handled. When unexplained events occurred, illnesses, psychological distress, social tension, they were slotted into that pre-existing framework, producing outbreaks that feel, in modern times, like culturally mediated mass psychogenic events. Now, so the fox demon panics are less a single unified incident and more a recurring pattern, peaking at the end of Imperial China. Localized possession outbreaks, amplified by rumor, shaped by centuries of literature and belief, and intensified by the fears of a society undergoing rapid political change. They sit alongside other late Qing moral panics, such as queue-cutting sorcerers, the soul stealers, etc., but with a uniquely intimate twist. Instead of an external conspirator, the threat was already inside the home, speaking through someone you knew, wearing a familiar face and calling itself Auntie. The particularly harrowing thing with these fox spirit possessions, however, is that most, I'm not going to say all, and I hesitate to even say most, but quite a few of these incidents is that they moved into bizarre territory where inexplicable events such as poltergeist activity accompanied them. So this wasn't just like a mental illness. These cases often involve poltergeist activity. There's alleged 1900s police logs describing heavy furniture being moved and foxfire, or, like just spontaneous combustion, not of people necessarily, but of just items around the household, just manifesting at city walls or furniture within the household. So these are the specific examples of incidents like these are very hard to find. I'm doing some more digging because I want to find, if I can, some actual cases of this. So I don't know. I don't know how well that's going to work out, but I've constantly got feelers out for potential cases like this. This is why I go back to 1900, because, man, once you get that turn of the century, especially in places like China or anywhere that's been affected by massive political events and historical changes, records from that era are spotty at best. Now, this next one is called The Worm Man of the Qinling Mountains.
What's up, the big perm? I mean big worm, big worm, big worm. Oh yeah, alright. Okay, what's up? It's Friday. Come on, babe. What's up, the
Which is already an anomalous hotspot. Now, this one I'm almost positive is pure urban legend. There's no necessary there's no psychological activity behind this, no hysteria, etc. But the Qingling Mountains are considered like the Sinaloa of Chinese high strangeness. It's just a massive, rugged range that acts as a biological and spiritual divide between North and South China. There's the legend of Kun Miao. In the late 1980s, reports surfaced of entire villages in the deep valleys being wiped out or relocated overnight. And the rumor behind some of these relocations or disappearances of villages, one in particular, was attributed to the Worm Man. Big Worm.
Playing with my money is like playing with my emotions.
So, according to alleged Bureau 749 style leaked documents, researchers found a humanoid entity that appeared to be made entirely of tightly packed translucent parasitic worms. This is like a collective entity in a humanoid form. It didn't have a skeleton, and it held its shape through a hive mind of muscular tension. It allegedly fed by wrapping itself around a host and vibrating at a frequency that liquefied internal organs without breaking the skin. Locals still allegedly avoid certain quiet valleys where no birds sing, believing these colonial organisms still mimic human shapes to lure in travelers. But this story represents a horrifying departure from most of the psychic research and urban legends of the time into a realm of biological transhumanism and body horror. The alleged 1993 archives of the supposed Bureau 749 refer to this entity as a Lumbricus sapiens, and this was referred to as the Lumbricus sapiens incident. They were chasing what could manifest as a parasitic nightmare. The incident began in a series of isolated logging villages deep within the Qinling Mountains, a range historically known as the Root of the Dragon, as far as, the Chinese equivalent of ley lines and geomancy is concerned. So in 1987, local police received bizarre reports of, quote, a man who could fold himself, unquote. Witnesses claimed to have seen a local villager who had recently returned from a forbidden cave system whose movements had become unnaturally fluid, as if his skeletal structure had dissolved. According to leaked 749 field logs, alleged leaked 749 field logs, the individual's skin had taken on a translucent reddish hue. He was found nesting in a damp, lightless cellar. He had reportedly ceased speaking, communicating instead through high-pitched vibrations that caused nausea and nosebleeds in those nearby, which was referred to by the 507 Institute as bioacoustic interference. When the alleged Bureau 749 arrived to extract the subject, they discovered that the man, the quote-unquote man, was no longer a single organism. The 1993 archive describes a state of somatic colonization, where a non-terrestrial worm-like biomass had integrated with the host's nervous system. So unlike the Mongolian death worm, which is a physical cryptid, the Qinling worm was an etheric parasite. It didn't eat the host, it became the host's musculature. The Bureau's surgeons reportedly found that the host's bones had been softened into a cartilage-like substance to allow for the creature's extreme flexibility. This was classified as a Project Zero failure. Project Zero is, I believe, an offshoot of Bureau 749. So, once again, take with a dose of MSG. The Worm Man story has taken on a sort of prophetic tone in the quote-unquote awakener community. They see the 1987 incident as a warning of incomplete activation, how things can go wrong when starseed physiology meets improper meditation techniques, things like this. I mean, during the Qigong boom or the Qigong boom and Qigong fever, there is something known as, I think it's actually called Qigong fever, where improper meditation techniques or improper use of Qigong practices can cause psychological breaks within people. It can cause actual, physical responses in people of just your energy being out of whack. I know that's, not very scientific sounding, but there are, equivalents like this. There are certain physiological quote unquote illnesses or affliction that can come from improper, that's the word often attached to it, improper meditation techniques. They have equivalents in yoga, such as I believe it's called Kundalini fever or a Kundalini break. They can basically cause psychotic breaks in people if done wrong or practiced by done improperly, etc. So, yeah, the Worm Man, sort of a dark side of the whole starseed idea. It's a reminder that becoming more than human can sometimes look like something far less than human. It's also just fucking weird as shit. But once again, the Worm Man of the Qinling Mountains is far more elusive and ambiguous, almost entirely in the realm of late 20th century fringe anecdote and online lore. A retroactive cryptozoological storytelling motif. Not stable primary source tradition for a discrete worm man entity in the late 1980s. There appears to be a composite legend that was amalgamated out of several overlapping currents in the post-cultural revolution wild man fever, which we'll get into here in just a moment. Regional mountain folklore and broader Eurasian giant worm mythologies. I just found this one particularly odd, and that's why I threw it in. But this was also kind of on the heels of wild man fever, the Yeren, the Chinese equivalent of Bigfoot, which we'll get into in a moment. Next up, we've got the spirit writing murders of Shanghai. This is an occult crime. This is literal occult crime. The 1920s. So during the 1920s, Shanghai was a hotbed for what's known as Fuji. It's a form of spirit writing similar to the Ouija board, but using a suspended wooden planchette or sieve. A wealthy merchant's family was found dead in a locked room with no signs of struggle except for a Fuji board in the center of the room. The quote-unquote spirit had allegedly written a series of poems predicting their deaths. The lead detective found that a disgruntled medium had been using a combination of hallucinogenic incense made from datura and crushed insects and psychological suggestion to induce a mass suicide homicide. The case became a sensation because the medium claimed he wasn't the killer, but merely a translator for an ancient general's ghost who was reclaiming his land. So the Shanghai spirit writing murders of the 1920s represent one of the most complex occult crimes in the prehistory of Chinese high strangeness, marking a moment where traditional Taoist mediumship, or Fuji, collided with the predatory spiritual science movements of the Republican era. And while the public saw these as a series of grisly ritualistic homicides, the internal dossiers of the China Academy of Metaphysics treat them as a case of etheric hijacking, where the mediumistic process was allegedly weaponized for assassination. There's also the Fuji seance breaches of 1923 to 1927, which involves two practitioners holding a wooden stylus over a tray of sand with a spirit supposedly guiding the tool to write characters. In 1923, a series of elite private seances in the French concession of Shanghai began to deviate from traditional fortune-telling. Participants reported that the planchette would suddenly begin moving with violent mechanical speed, carving names and death dates into the sand. Within days of these sessions, the named individuals, often wealthy industrialists or political rivals, would be found dead under quote-unquote impossible circumstances, such as locked room suffocations or sudden unexplained cardiac failure. So these so-called spirit writing murders of Shanghai in the 1920s occupy a sort of shadowy space somewhere between documented social practice and later narrative embellishment, much like the Worm Man story, but with a firmer grounding in real, historically attested phenomena. At the center of the legend is the practice of planchette divination, once again known in Chinese as Fuji, or spirit writing, a ritual in which a suspended stylus or a forked stick, guided by one or more participants, who are often mediums, produce written messages believed to come from deities, immortals, or the dead. And this was not fringe behavior in the early 20th century of China. In fact, spirit writing had been widely practiced since at least the Song dynasty and saw a major revival in the late Qing and Republican periods, particularly through morality societies and redemptive religious movements that used it to transmit ethical teachings, divine instructions, and even entire revealed texts. By the 1920s, Shanghai was a uniquely volatile environment for such practices. A hybrid metropolis under partial foreign control, it was saturated with competing ideologies, traditional cosmology, Western science, missionary Christianity, occult revivalism, and booming tabloid press. Guess which one had a hand in sensationalizing most of this? Spirit writing societies flourished in this milieu, sometimes operating openly as moral instruction groups, other times more clandestine as esoteric circles claiming access to powerful or dangerous entities. Within these circles, the boundary between divination, mediumship, and spirit possession could become flexible. Messages received through Fuji might diagnose illness, accuse individuals of wrongdoing, or prescribe some ritual action. In a city already rife with secret societies, criminal syndicates, and political intrigue, this created fertile ground for rumor and panic. The murders associated with spirit writing are not a single well-documented case, but rather a cluster of anecdotes and press reports, fragmentary, inconsistently sourced, and often filtered through later retellings that describe situations in which spirit writing sessions allegedly led to accusations, violence, or death. A typical narrative runs as follows. A Fuji circle convenes to consult a deity or spirit. During the session, the planchette produces a message identifying a hidden enemy, a moral transgressor, or a source of supernatural harm within the group's social network. The accused individual, often already marginal or socially vulnerable, probably a woman, maybe someone exhibiting mental illness of some sort, is then subjected to escalating pressure, confrontation, ostracism, ritual punishment, or in extreme versions of the story, outright murder. In some accounts, the spirit itself demands retribution, framing the act as divinely sanctioned justice rather than human violence. What gives these stories a degree of plausibility is the documented role of spirit writing in real legal and social conflicts of the period. Scholars of Republican-era religion have noted that Fuji revelations were sometimes treated as evidence within communities, influencing disputes over property, morality, and personal conduct. Organizations such as the Tongshan and other morality societies use spirit writing not only for ethical instruction, but also for adjudication, effectively allowing, quote-unquote, the gods to weigh in on human affairs. So in such a context, it's not difficult to imagine how a revelation could escalate into coercion or violence, particularly in the absence of strong institutional mediation. At the same time, the 1920s saw increasing backlash against these practices from both Chinese reformers and colonial authorities in Shanghai's foreign concessions. Intellectuals associated with the New Culture movement criticized spirit writing as superstition, while officials worried about its potential to foster disorder or mask criminal activity. Newspapers, both Chinese language and foreign run, occasionally reported on raids of spirit writing halls or exposed fraudulent mediums, contributing to an atmosphere in which Fuji circles were simultaneously sensationalized and stigmatized. Although specific murder cases tied directly and unequivocally to spirit writing are difficult to verify in archival records, the idea of such events circulated widely enough to become a recognizable urban legend. The seance that goes too far, the message that condemns, the ritual that turns deadly. There's also a strong possibility that later accounts of the spirit writing murders have been shaped by cross-cultural contamination with Western spiritualist anxieties. The early 20th century was globally a high watermark for seances, automatic writing, and fears about malevolent or deceptive spirits. In Shanghai, a city where Western occultism and Chinese ritual traditions coexisted and occasionally overlapped, these narrative forms could easily become hybridized. A Fuji session might be reinterpreted through the lens of a seance. A moral accusation becomes a curse. A community dispute becomes a murder ordered by spirits. Over time, retellings sort of smooth these elements into a more coherent but less historically grounded story. So, as with the fox spirit panics and the Qingling worm man, what you're left with is not a single canonical event, but a pattern of belief-driven escalation, anchored in real-world and widespread practice, such as Fuji spirit writing, amplified by the unique social conditions of 1920 Shanghai, and preserved in fragments of reportage, anecdote, and, of course, myth-making and folklore. The murders, quote-unquote murders themselves, may be less important than what the stories reveal. A moment when invisible authorities, channeled through a wooden stylus or planchette tracing characters in the sand could carry enough weight to accuse, to condemn, and to, under the right circumstances, kill. Now, through that is where I was introduced to the soul-stealing panic of 1768. And this is another incident of historical occult crime. And this goes back a ways, but because it's a very specific outbreak, we'll say, that's why I wanted to include it. It's a bit earlier than the 1900 cutoff, but this set the precedent for all modern Chinese moral or hysterical panics involving occultism.
My honored guest, please accept my humble apologies.
Shut up! Listen to me now. Myself and my companions have brought you orders.
Our orders are that Shaolin Temple must surrender all of its land and its chief abbot into our safekeeping. All the monks must leave the temple. If they don't, they will be punished.
Honored guests, Shaolin Temple's land was given by the Emperor. I've been abbot for 20 years. And in one day, you want to destroy everything?
Are you disobeying the orders of our Lord? Shut up! We won't accept orders without authority. No man can change the solemn orders of the late Emperor. Where do you get your authority? I'll tell you. My Lord Chasu. Who is this man Chasu? No one can order this, except a prince of the royal blood. You dare to go against my Lord Chasu? I am not afraid. Only the Emperor of this country has the power to order this, not your Lord Chasu. What are you waiting for? Well, what are you waiting for? Report this to your Lord Chasu. Tell him I'll see him tomorrow.
So this was the soul-stealing panic of 1768. This is another example of historical occult crime. So the Q-May, or Q-clipping, was a huge part of this. A rumor spread across the Qing Empire that sorcerers were stealing men's souls by secretly snipping off the tips of their pigtails, or Qs as they were called. It was believed that the sorcerer could use the hair to bind the victim's spirit to a paper effigy, forcing the victim to work as a slave in the spirit world or simply causing them to drop dead. The soul-stealing panic of 1768 was one of the most intensively studied episodes of mass hysteria in Chinese history, unfolding during the reign of the Qianlong Emperor and spread across several provinces of the Qing Empire with startling speed, leaving in its wake arrests, executions, and a revealing paper trail of imperial paranoia. At its core was a rumor both simple and terrifying, that shadowy figures, often described as itinerant monks, beggars, or craftsmen, were cutting off people's queues, the mandatory Manchu-style braided hairstyle, or secretly snipping bits of hair and or clothing in order to steal their souls. In the cosmological, logic of the time, this was no mere superstition. Hair was intimately tied to bodily integrity and spiritual essence, and the queue itself carried political weight as a symbol of submission to Qing rule. To tamper with it was to threaten both the individual and the state. If you go back and check out my medicinal cannibalism episode, you'll see there was a Taoist book, I believe it was called the Qing Mao, I can't remember the name of it. Hey, future me, it's called the Ben Cao Gang Mu, and we cover it quite extensively in the medicinal cannibalism episode. Check it out. Thanks. If you go back and check the medicinal cannibalism episode, however, there are Taoist manuscripts that deal with various, let's say, bodily cast-off that can be used in various medicines or ritual workings, things like hair, toenails, teeth, seminal fluid, menses, etc., things of this nature that were used in various ritual practices. The panic began in the eastern provinces, particularly in areas like Zhejiang and Jiangsu, where reports circulated that sorcerers were using clipped hair and magical incantations to incapacitate victims, rendering them weak, ill, or even dead In some versions of the rumor, the stolen soul is used to empower construction projects such as bridges or buildings. In fact, throughout Asia, particularly China and Japan, you'll see a recurring motif in architectural stories, architectural urban legends about human bodies being concreted into certain structures, etc. Human sacrifices used to basically christen a bridge, things like this. These echo older beliefs about human sacrifice or spiritual foundations. Suspects were accused of carrying paper charms, scissors, and other ritual tools, and of working in networks to harvest souls on a large scale. As fear spread, ordinary people began detaining strangers, extracting confessions under duress, and turning them over to local authorities. The line between rumor and evidence collapsed almost immediately. What makes the 1768 panic especially significant is the degree to which it drew the Qing apparatus, the state apparatus, into these circumstances. The Qianlong emperor himself became deeply involved, issuing edicts that treated the alleged sorcery as a serious and coordinated threat. Surviving memorials and court documents analyzed in detail in Soul Stealers, the Chinese sorcery scare of 1768, show how the emperor demanded thorough investigations, pressured officials to produce results, and grew increasingly suspicious of bureaucratic complacency. Local magistrates, caught between imperial demands and the absence of credible evidence, often resorted to coercive interrogation. Confessions, quote-unquote confessions, frequently extracted through torture, began to conform to the expected narrative. Organized bands of sorcerers, secret methods of soul extraction, and widespread conspiracies. These admissions, in turn, validated the emperor's fears, creating a feedback loop between rumor, investigation, and imperial belief. The social dynamics of the panic reveal a pattern that recurs in many mass hysteria events. The accused were almost always marginal figures, transient laborers, monks without fixed temple affiliations, beggars, and other socially vulnerable individuals, women, the mentally ill, who could plausibly be cast as outsiders. Their mobility made them suspect in a society where stability and rootedness were prized, and their unfamiliarity made them easy targets for projection. In several documented cases, individuals were seized by local communities, beaten, and forced to confess to soul-stealing practices they likely did not understand themselves. The accusations often spread along lines of rumor rather than direct observation. Someone heard of a case in a neighboring district or districts, which lent credibility to similar suspicions at home. At the same time, the panic cannot be reduced to irrational fear alone. It tapped into deeper political and cultural anxieties of the Qing period. The queue, as a mandated hairstyle imposed after the Manchu conquest, was a potent symbol of loyalty and resentment. Rumors of queue-cutting sorcerers implicitly evoked the specter of rebellion or subversion, even if no such organized movement existed. The emperor's intense reactions suggested that he perceived, at some level, a challenge to the symbolic order of the state. Sorcery, in this context, became a language through which diffuse fears about control, identity, and legitimacy were expressed. As the investigation dragged on, however, the lack of concrete evidence became increasingly apparent. Despite the numerous confessions and arrests, officials struggled to produce any verifiable proof of actual soul-stealing techniques or organized networks. Gradually, skepticism began to surface within the bureaucracy, and the emperor himself appears to have recognized that the case had been inflated beyond its factual basis. The panic subsided as abruptly as it had begun, leaving behind a trail of wrongful accusations, coerced confessions, and bureaucratic record that, ironically, preserved the anatomy of the hysteria in remarkable detail. In retrospect, the soul-stealing panic of 1768 stands as a proper example, I guess you'd say, of how rumor, authority, and cultural belief can interact to produce large-scale social crisis. It shares structural features with later events like the fox spirit scares of the Qing's final decades, or even modern moral panics, satanic panics, yet is uniquely illuminated by the depth of its documentation. Through the lens of imperial archives and works like Kuhn's Soul Stealers, the Chinese sorcery scare of 1768 by Philip Kuhn, We can watch almost in real time as an empire attempts to grapple with an invisible occult threat, only to find that the act of pursuing it makes the threat feel all that more real.
Mr. Chow, in your opinion, compare this guy with the tiger. If they have a fight, who would win?
Well, although this guy is quick and powerful, but compared to Tiger, he's still a little behind.
Right. I myself saw the tiger many years ago. He was clashing with a famous opponent and won easily. He really is the best. There's no one who can beat him.
I don't believe it. I'd like to see a match set up.
Too bad the tiger isn't here. Otherwise, we're going to see a real fight. So many years. Where's the tiger been hiding?
For a more modern, updated take on such events, you have the nail-in-the-head exorcisms. Yikes. These occurred in rural Sichuan in the 1990s, allegedly. During the peak of Qigong fever, several fringe cults blended traditional exorcisms with pseudoscience. The so-called nail-in-the-head exorcisms reported in rural Sichuan during the 1990s occupy a deeply unsettling intersection between traditional spirit possession beliefs and local healing practices, and sporadic episodes of extreme violence that were later reframed, oftentimes sensationally, as occult or demonic phenomena. Unlike the more diffuse and rumor-driven cases we've discussed previously, this phenomenon appears to be loosely anchored in real criminal incidents and court cases, though the exorcism framing often emerges more clearly in retrospective accounts and media amplification than in contemporaneous documentation. The core claim is stark, that individuals believed to be possessed by malevolent spirits were subjected to ritual treatments involving the insertion of nails or spikes into the skull, ostensibly to expel or immobilize the invading entity. The cultural logic behind such an act, while extreme, is not entirely without precedent in the broader context of Chinese folk religion. In many rural areas, particularly those with limited access to formal medical or psychiatric care, conditions such as epilepsy, schizophrenia, or severe dissociative states have historically been interpreted through the lens of spirit possession. Ritual specialists, spirit mediums, or self-styled healers might be called upon to perform exorcisms, which could include chanting, talismans, physical restraint, or the symbolic pinning of a spirit to prevent its movement. While literal cranial penetration is not a standard or widely attested practice in Orthodox traditions, the symbolic idea of fixing or trapping a spirit within the body has parallels in other ritual contexts, making it conceivable that such logic could be taken to a violent extreme under certain conditions. Now, I don't know how true this is or how accurate this information is, but the act of trepanation, as it's been known in the West, has been exhibited in certain ritual practice frameworks throughout time in different civilizations, societies, etc. Several widely circulated accounts, most of which gained prominence in the 2000s and 2010s through internet forums and compilations of bizarre medical cases, describe incidents in which victims, often children or young women, were found to have nails embedded in their skulls. I think this is also what lent to the Taoist black magic interpretation of the boy in the red dress case in the 2010s. Sometimes these victims would survive for extended periods before they were even discovered. In some cases, these events were investigated as attempted murders or abuse, with perpetrators identified as family members or local healers acting under the belief that the victim was possessed. One frequently cited example, though inconsistently sourced, involves a child in Sichuan who was reportedly exhibiting unusual behavior and was subjected to repeated treatments, quote-unquote treatments, by a caregiver or healer, resulting in multiple nails being driven into the head. The child survived long enough for the injuries to be discovered via medical imaging, leading to criminal charges. While details vary and primary sources are often difficult to trace, similar cases of cranial nail insertion have been documented in Chinese medical literature as rare but real instances of abuse or mental illness rather than a sanctioned ritual practice. From a legal and institutional standpoint, the Chinese state in the 1990s was already firmly opposed to what it categorized as quote-unquote feudal superstitions. And cases involving violent exorcisms would have been prosecuted under criminal law rather than treated as legitimate religious activity. However, enforcement in remote rural areas could be uneven at best, and deeply ingrained belief systems sometimes persisted beneath the surface of official ideology. This created an environment in which extreme actions might be taken within a closed community before authorities became aware. When such cases did surface, they were often reframed in starkly rational terms: assault, abuse, homicide, while the underlying belief in possession was treated as a contributing factor rather than a legitimizing context. It's also important to recognize the role of retrospective sensationalism in shaping the modern image of these incidents. So much like the Worm Man case, the nail in the head exorcisms have been amplified through online retellings that emphasize horror, mystery, and the supposed persistence of ancient practices into the modern era. These narratives often blur together distinct cases, omit legal outcomes, and focus upon the most shocking elements while downplaying more mundane explanations such as mental illness, domestic abuse, or individual pathology. This result is a kind of hybrid legend, grounded in real-world events but transformed into something that feels like a coherent practice rather than tradition, or a series of isolated and tragic events. Anthropologically, what these cases reveal is less a hidden system of ritual violence and more the extreme edge of a belief spectrum, a point at which the interpretation of illness as possession, combined with desperation and lack of medical resources, can lead to a catastrophic outcome. The idea that a spirit can inhabit and control the body remains a powerful explanatory model in many cultures. And when the model is paired with the conviction that the spirit must be forcibly expelled, the potential for harm becomes very real. So in this sense, the nail-in-the-head exorcisms are not an aberration so much as a grim illustration of how belief, fear, and isolation can converge in the worst possible way. So as with other cases in this series, what endures isn't a clearly defined or widely practiced ritual, but a narrative pattern. Unexplained behavior interpreted as possession, an intervention framed as necessary or even compassionate in some cases, and an outcome that reveals the dangerous gap between symbolic logic and physical reality. The nails themselves, whether literal or metaphorical in different accounts, becomes a chilling artifact of that gap, a point where the invisible world is forced, quite brutally, into the visible one. Next up are the human goo or child human goo, GU, or child spirit jars. And this is all throughout Southeast Asia, pretty much. We'll be getting more into the concept of goo black magic, GU, or Koo, as it's also known, black magic, in an upcoming sequel episode that I've got planned after this China series wraps up. But in the 1920s and again in the 1980s, there were alleged cold cases where jars were found containing preserved human fetuses or infant remains wrapped in yellow talismans and soaked in quote-unquote corpse oil. The sorcerer would feed the jar with drops of their own blood and incense, believing they could command the child spirit to spy on business rivals or bring lottery luck. Long way to go for six little numbers. In 1992, a black magic ring was busted in a coastal village where they were reportedly buying human remains from hospitals. The unsettling part for listeners is the feeding ritual. Practitioners believed that if they stopped feeding the spirit, it would turn on them and eat their family's luck, leading to a cycle of ritualistic offerings to appease the jar. The alleged cases of human goo or child spirit jars in Chinese tradition sits at a crossroads of documented ritual practice, historical accusation, and later sensational reinterpretation, forming one of the more disturbing but also more misunderstood strands of Chinese occult folklore. The term most often invoked in connection with these stories is goo, a concept that originates in ancient southern China and refers broadly to a form of sorcery involving toxins, poisons, spirits, or parasitic forces cultivated through deliberate, often secretive processes. Far from being a single practice, Gu encompasses a wide range of techniques and beliefs, many of which were historically associated with the southern frontier regions like Lingnan, Yunnan, and Guangxi, where Han Chinese officials often projected anxieties about exotic and dangerous local customs. In its classical form, Gu is commonly associated or described with poison cultivation rituals. Venomous creatures such as snakes, centipedes, toads, etc., are sealed inside of a container and left to devour one another, with the survivor becoming a concentrated source of toxin or spiritual poison potency. This process, already quite grisly and macabre, became a powerful metaphor for hidden harm, corruption, and invisible influence. Over time, however, literary sources and legal records began to expand the concept of Gu beyond animal-based poisons into something more abstract and sinister, a kind of ensouled malign force that could be directed against human victims to cause illness, madness, or death. It's within this expanded conceptual space that later stories of human Gu began to emerge. The idea of human Gu, particularly in the form of jars containing child spirits, is not well attested in primary historical sources as a standardized or widely practiced ritual, but rather appears as a convergence of several different traditions and accusations. Think along Eastern or Chinese lines of blood libel to a degree. One of the key contributing strands is the long-standing association between Gu sorcery and the use of human victims in rumor and legal discourse. During various periods of Chinese history, especially during the Qin and Han dynasties and later during times of social unrest, accusations of Gu poisoning could lead to mass prosecutions, exile, or even execution. These accusations often included claims that practitioners used human remains, bodily substances, or even living victims to create or empower their Gu, though such claims are generally understood by historians as exaggerated or fabricated within a climate of fear and suspicion. A second, and perhaps more directly relevant strand, comes from the broader East and Southeast Asian complex of child spirit magic, in which the spirit of a deceased child, especially one who died prematurely or violently, is believed to possess potent, volatile energy. While this is most famously systemized in Southeast Asian traditions such as the Thai Kumantong, Chinese folklore also contains motifs of child ghosts or yingling that can be bound, appeased, or manipulated. In some late and largely anecdotal accounts, particularly those circulating in the 20th and 21st centuries, these ideas are fused with the Gu framework to produce the image of a sealed jar containing a child spirit, cultivated or controlled for purposes of wealth, protection, or revenge. These child spirit jar narratives tend to follow a consistent pattern. A practitioner, often portrayed as a sorcerer, a hermit, or some criminal figure, acquires the remains or spirit of a child, places it within the confined vessel, frequently described as a ceramic jar, and performs rituals to bind the entity to their will. The jar becomes both a container and a conduit, housing a being that can be fed, commanded, or unleashed. In some versions, the spirit must be periodically nourished through offerings. In darker accounts, it becomes dangerous or uncontrollable if neglected. While compelling as a narrative, these accounts are overwhelmingly late, secondhand, and sensational, with little corroboration in earlier textual or ethnographic and anthropological records. Scholars generally interpret these stories not as evidence of a hidden, continuous ritual practice, but as a layered construction built from older elements. The fear of Gu poisoning, the moral panic surrounding sorcery accusations, and the enduring unease associated with child death and restless spirits. The jars themselves may also reflect a symbolic logic rooted in earlier practices, containers as sites of transformation, incubation, or confinement, as seen in alchemical traditions or even burial customs. When combined, these elements create a narrative that feels coherent and ancient, even if its specific form is relatively modern. There's also a strong argument that the modern images of human goo jars have been shaped by cross-cultural and media influence. In the late 20th century, as information and folklore circulated more freely across East and Southeast Asia, motifs from Thai, Malaysian, and Indonesian spirit practices began to appear in Chinese language horror stories, pulp literature, and eventually internet forums. So the result is a kind of feedback loop. Older Chinese concepts like goo are reinterpreted through the lens of Southeast Asian spirit magic, then reintroduced as supposedly lost or secret Chinese traditions. This process mirrors what we've seen with the Worm Man and other hybrid legends, stories that gain plausibility by anchoring themselves in genuine cultural concepts while incorporating external imagery. From a legal and historical standpoint, what's well documented is the seriousness with which goo accusations were treated. Entire families could be implicated, and the mere suspicion of involvement in such practices could lead to severe punishments. This suggests that the true historical impact of goo poison lies less in any specific ritual and more in its function as a social and political weapon, a way of articulating fears about hidden harm, betrayal, and the unseen forces that might undermine both personal and communal stability. So that human goo, or child spirit jar cases, as they are commonly described today, are best understood not as a discrete set of verified events, but as a composite mythology, an amalgamation of ancient poison magic, historical sorcery panics, child spirit folklore, and modern horror aesthetics. Like the fox spirits, the soul stealers, or the Yerin, or Chinese equivalent of Bigfoot, they reveal how deeply the ideas of the invisible agent, something hidden, contained, and yet profoundly powerful, runs through Chinese imagination and cultural history. The jar, in this sense, is less an object than a metaphor, a sealed space where fear, imagination, and inherited belief are allowed to ferment until they take on a life or afterlife of their own.
What do you want?
Is that one-eyed bastard here?
Who the hell are you? You dare call our boss that?
You bums obviously don't know me.
Oh, I know you. You're one of Lou's men, the one they say can kick like a mule.
Well, if you know who I am, then ask the bastard to come out.
Watch out. You're on our home ground now.
I couldn't give a shit who this area belongs to. Where I am always belongs to me.
Well, then maybe I'd like to find out. If that's the truth. Hit me.
Stop it! Li Tong Hao, what do you want? I want one of your men. Who's that? The one behind you. The fat dog.
I don't know him.
Now, there's another case. This is the one I referred to earlier that's probably going to get its whole own episode. That is the mutilated spirits of the Boxer Rebellion, occurred in 1900. The Boxer Rebellion in itself is a huge historical event in Chinese history, but this is also where you get a lot of various, what could be referred to as occult crime occurring, but you get also tales of the White Lotus. There's a lot of, as much as I hate to simplify it in this way, kung fu versus guns history going on. There's also soul-severing crimes, paperman sorcery, dark Taoist practices, alleged practices, and kind of the birth of what's often known as Mao Shan Taoist black magic. Now, Mao Shan is an actual Taoist lineage, but once again, through pop culture and the proliferation of certain archetypes and tropes through Hong Kong horror cinema, Mao Shan has become associated with Taoist black magic. It's almost just a pop cultural interconnectedness that is, at this point, pretty much permanent. So, but yeah, the Boxer Rebellion, that's a huge story. That's way more complicated than I can give it credit here. But I was unaware at first of the the amount of ritual practices that were so ingrained in this historical event. There was a lot of, first of all, kung fu taking place, which, hey, awesome, badass.
My tiger kung fu is better than yours.
But then you had the righteous and harmonious fists, aka the boxers, who practiced rituals of spirit possession. They would open themselves to possession by various figures such as the Monkey King from the story The Journey to the West. They believed that the yin energy of women, specifically their menstrual blood or even their presence, could jam the boxers in vulnerability spells, which led to horrific ritualistic killings of contaminated, quote-unquote, contaminated people.
Ritualistic.
They would often leave the bodies in specific geometric patterns at the gates of captured villages to act as spiritual shields against Western foreign devil technology, which they viewed as a rival form of black magic. The White Lotus Society was a millenarian sect that believed the world was ending and only they could save human souls. There are accounts from the early 1900s of White Lotus agents being accused of paperman sorcery. They would cut human shapes out of paper, perform blood rituals, and then throw them at the victims. Witnesses claimed that when the paper touched a victim, they would fall into a permanent coma. And the cult was accused of doing this to harvest souls to build an army for the Great Mother of the West in the afterlife. Created a massive panic where people would wear red thread around their necks or carry mirrors to reflect the paperman's gaze as a form of occult armor. Very intense, crazy story, which I plan on doing a lot more research on in the future. But, I mean, something I'd heard of, and I never, really pieced together the intense, ritualistic, and occult side of things. But very, very interesting. It needs its own episode or episodes to do it justice. There are other stories that don't quite fall into the category of occult crime. These would be more, some are more cryptid stories. Like there's the story of the human-faced crab. If you want to see what I'm talking about, there's a certain species of crab in Japan known as the Haikegani, Heikegani. It's pretty freaky. I could see how people would associate these particular crabs with being human-faced crabs, but the sightings of these things were often viewed as ill omens. There's, in fact, a mass global history throughout numerous cultures across time of what's considered anything monstrous or deformed is considered a omen. In fact, I'm working on a secret project, not giving too much away, that deals with a lot of this kind of stuff, but I don't want to say too much on that because it's fucking more complex than I thought it would be, and it's a real pain in my ass, but if I can do it right, it'll be awesome. So, another cryptid bit. Keep mentioning the wild man, the Yeren of Shenongjia. Often translated as the Yeren, wild man or savage man. It's one of the more extensively documented and culturally revealing cryptid traditions in modern China, occupying this sort of liminal space between folklore, state-sponsored scientific inquiry. There was quite a bit of money put into researching this, and mass participatory rumor. So centered in the dense mountainous forest of Shenongjia Forest District, the Yeren tradition draws on much older Chinese narratives of hairy people, or Mao Ren, and uncivilized forest dwellers. But it reached its peak during the late 20th century, particularly the 70s and 80s, when it became the focus of nationwide attention, organized expeditions, and a kind of quasi-official cryptozoological enthusiasm. Descriptions of the Yeren are surprisingly consistent across decades of reports. A large, upright, human-like creature covered in reddish or dark hair, standing anywhere from 6 to 8 feet tall, with long arms, a sloping forehead, and a powerful, sometimes foul-smelling presence. I think we've all met a Yeren at least once in our life. Witnesses ranging from farmers and hunters to soldiers and forestry workers frequently describe fleeting encounters, a figure glimpsed crossing a road, moving through dense brush, or standing momentarily before disappearing into the forest. Some accounts include more dramatic details, the creature throwing stones, emitting loud cries, or even interacting briefly with humans before retreating. What distinguishes the Yeren from purely folkloric beings is the sheer volume and diversity of witnesses, many of whom were considered credible by local authorities and investigators. There's some turn-of-the-century accounts of children being stolen by what are presumed Yeren. There's even one story about a tribal village who captured one of these beings in the midst of it trying to steal a young child, and the women of the village beat it to death and then chopped it up. And as they were doing so, strange cries could be heard coming out of the jungle from inhuman creatures of a similar build. The modern Yeren boom, however, began in earnest in the mid-1970s when a series of highly publicized sightings in Hubei province triggered national curiosity. In 1976, reports of the Xinangjia region described multiple encounters, including one in which a creature allegedly blocked a road and observed at close range by several individuals. These reports prompted the involvement of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, which, along with provincial authorities, organized expeditions to investigate the claims. Teams collected physical evidence such as hair samples, footprints, and eyewitness testimony, though none of this material was ever conclusively linked to an unknown species. Nevertheless, the mere fact of state-backed investigation lent the phenomena a degree of legitimacy unusual in most cryptid lore. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, these investigative efforts intensified. Scientists, students, and even military personnel participated in searches, combing the forests of Xinangjia for signs of the creature. Footprints, sometimes measuring over a foot in length, were documented and cast in plaster. Hair samples were analyzed, often yielding inconclusive or contradictory results, some identified as belonging to known animals, others remaining unidentified. Local guides shared oral histories that extended the Yeren's presence back generations, reinforcing the idea that this was not a new phenomenon but a long-standing element of regional knowledge. At the same time, the Yeren became a media sensation. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and later television programs amplified the sightings, creating a feedback loop in which public awareness generated more reports, which in turn justified further investigation. This period coincided with China's post-cultural revolution reopening, when scientific curiosity, popular fascination, and a loosening of ideological constraints allowed previously marginalized topics like anomalous creatures to enter mainstream discourse and media. The Yeren thus became not just a cryptid, but a symbol of rediscovery, a sort of tantalizing possibility that China's vast and underexplored landscapes might still harbor unknown forms of life. I mean, the Longyu Caves, for example, is just an anomalous event/area. I think were only discovered in the late 80s. There's still various pyramids throughout China that no one knows shit about. So, I mean, as far as Western audiences are concerned, skeptical explanations have always coexisted with belief. Many scientists have suggested that Yeren sightings can be attributed to misidentified animals, known animals, particularly bears, such as the Asiatic black bear, which can stand upright and appear humanoid at a certain distance, or to optical illusions and the psychological effects of expectation in a dense forested environment. Others point to the role of hoaxes or exaggeration, especially as the phenomena gain notoriety. Yet these explanations don't fully account for the persistence and consistency of the reports, nor for the cultural frameworks that shape how such encounters are interpreted. The Yeren can be understood as a modern expression of much older Chinese ideas about the boundary between civilization and the wilderness. In classical texts, the mountains and forests were often depicted as spaces inhabited by liminal beings, part human, part animal, existing outside the moral and social order. The Yeren fits neatly into this conceptual lineage, updated for the 20th century and reframed through the language of biology and exploration. So in this sense, it's less a relic of superstition than a hybrid construct, where folklore, scientific aspirations, and national identity intersect. By the late 1980s, interest in the Yeren began to wane somewhat as repeated expeditions failed to produce definitive evidence, and China's rapid modernization shifted attention elsewhere. However, the legend never fully disintegrated. Shenangjia has since embraced the Yeren as part of its cultural and tourist identity, with museums, statues, and local narratives keeping the story alive. Today, the wild man of Shenangjia remains one of the most compelling examples of how a society can collectively investigate the unknown, mobilizing institutions, media, and imagination in pursuit of a creature that may or may not exist, but whose impact on culture and consciousness is undeniably real. Real quick, as far as like other occult crimes and high strangeness, there's also the ghost marriage homicides, or Menghun homicides. I talk about these in previous episodes. Sex and the Supernatural goes deep into the whole ghost bride phenomena, the ghost marriages, etc. There's actually a ring of murders associated with this practice, but I go much more into that on the Sex and the Supernatural episode. Check it out. Another occult crime scare is the alleged mirror soul ritual of the 1920s in Shanghai. Belongs to that same sort of gray zone where actual documented practices, urban myth, and later occult sensationalism overlap so tightly that disentangling them becomes part of the story itself. So unlike the Fuji or spirit writing crimes, which is well attested in both historical and ethnographic records, there's no clearly documented or standardized ritual in Chinese tradition known specifically as a mirror soul practice tied to criminal cases in Republican-era Shanghai. But instead, what later gets labeled this way appears to be a composite narrative or myth built from three real and deeply rooted elements. The first being the long-standing use of mirrors in Chinese ritual and cosmology. The second, widespread beliefs about souls being separable, capturable, or displaceable. And three, volatile, rumor-rich environments of 1920 Shanghai where occult practices and criminal anxieties were frequently overlapping. Mirrors in Chinese tradition have never been neutral objects. From antiquity, bronze mirrors were believed to possess what's known as apotropaic properties, capable of revealing hidden truths, repelling malign forces or spirits, or exposing spirits that might otherwise remain unseen. Taoist ritual manuals and popular practice alike treated reflective surfaces as liminal tools, thresholds between the visible and invisible worlds. At the same time, Chinese concepts of the soul, often articulated as multiple components such as Hun and Po, allowed for the possibility that aspects of a person's essence could wander, or be displaced, or even be captured under certain conditions. When these two ideas are combined, the logic of a mirror soul ritual becomes immediately plausible. A mirror as a device not just for seeing spirits, but for containing or interacting with the soul itself. There's also sort of, I would say, borderline cryptid lore associated with mirrors, and that certain beliefs in certain areas throughout Chinese history have attributed mirrors as the sort of dwelling place of certain shape-shifting spirits that may potentially escape their confines within the mirror world. By the early 20th century, Shanghai provided an ideal environment for such ideas to mutate into more elaborate and more dangerous forms. The city's hybrid status as a semi-colonial metropolis brought together Taoist ritualists, Buddhist practitioners, spirit-writing societies, Western spiritualists, and a thriving underworld of secret societies and criminal networks. Within this environment, mirrors could be reinterpreted through multiple overlapping frameworks, as traditional talismans, as tools akin to Western seance apparatus, or as an instrument of psychological suggestion. Rumors began to circulate, mostly in later retellings, but plausibly rooted in that era, that certain practitioners used mirrors in dimly lit rooms to induce trance states, summon apparitions, or draw out the soul of a participant for questioning or manipulation. The alleged crimes associated with these practices follow a narrative pattern strikingly similar to the spirit writing cases. A small group gathers for a ritual. A participant, often already emotionally or psychologically vulnerable, is placed before a mirror, sometimes after chanting, incense burning, or prolonged fixation on their own reflection. In this heightened state, the subject may disassociate, hallucinate, enter a trance-like state, that rhyme, which is then interpreted as the externalization of the soul. At this point, the ritual leader claims authority over what's occurring, asserting that the soul can be guided, interrogated, or even restrained in some form or fashion. In the more extreme versions of the story, the process leads to coercion, exploitation, or death. The participant may be convinced they are spiritually compromised, compelled to surrender money or property, or subjected to further quote-unquote treatments that escalate into physical harm. While specific, well-documented homicide cases tied directly to mirror soul rituals are elusive at best, there are contemporaneous concerns, reflected in press reports and reformist writings, about fraudulent mediums and occult practitioners in Shanghai using psychological manipulation to control clients. The city's newspapers frequently expose scams involving seances, spirit possession, and magical cures, often portraying practitioners as exploiting fear and belief for profit. So in this context, the mirror becomes less a supernatural device and more of a psychological technology, a way of focusing attention, inducing suggestibility, and creating the impression of an external presence where none objectively exists. It's also difficult to ignore the parallels with Western practices of the same era. The early 20th century saw widespread experimentation with mirror gazing and what's known as psychomantiums. There were psychomantium-like setups in Europe and America where participants would stare into reflective surfaces under controlled lighting to induce visions or contact with the dead, or other various spirits. Essentially, in some of these cases, there were even full-blown constructions of mirrored rooms in which people could enter and allegedly enter various trance-like states, etc., and make contact with the spirits of the dead, elementals, what have you. In a cosmopolitan city like Shanghai, where ideas move freely between cultures, it's entirely plausible that such techniques influenced or were reinterpreted through local traditions. So the result would be some hybrid ritual form. Chinese in its symbolic framework, but more global in its methods and presentation. So as with the spirit writing murders, the mirror soul cases appear to have been retroactively consolidated into a more coherent legend than the historical record supports. But later accounts, especially those circulating in paranormal literature and online forums, tend to compress multiple events into a single narrative. A secretive group, a darkened room, a mirror that captures the soul, and a string of disappearances or deaths that follow. These stories often omit the more mundane but historically grounded explanations, such as fraud, coercion, untreated mental illness, what have you, in favor of a more dramatic occult framing. And what remains, then, is a less documented criminal phenomena than a cultural artifact of convergence. Mirrors as liminal tools, souls as easily manipulated entities, and a modernizing urban environment primed for both experimentation and panic. The mirror soul ritual, whether or not it ever existed in a stable, repeatable form, reflects a very real moment in Shanghai's history, when the boundaries between science and superstition, both East and West, performance and belief were usually flexible. And when something as simple as a reflective surface could become, in the right context, a doorway into fear, suggestion, and even sometimes harm. Yeah, and an additional bit of particularly creepy Chinese mirror myths, there's also the folklore of the fauna of the mirror. This is what I was mentioning earlier. But a race of beings also often referred to as mirror people. According to legend, which was notably documented by writer Jorge Luis Borges in the Book of Imaginary Beings, the key aspects of the belief include that a long time ago, the world of mirrors and the world of humans were separate but connected, allowing movement between them. After the mirror people invaded Earth, the legendary Yellow Emperor, or Huangdi, conquered them and trapped them within mirrors, cursing them to mimic the movements and actions of human beings. The creatures are believed to be able to alter their forms to look like humans, but they're not human. Their forms are designed to trick, as they act as a reverse reflection of humanity. The myth states that the curse is not permanent, that one day the mirror people will wake up and break through the barriers of glass or metal to reclaim their freedom. The legend suggests that they will be led by the fish of the mirror or the tiger of the mirror. In other related mirror folklore, the Ungai-kyo in Japanese folklore, which draws heavily from Chinese mythology, this is a mirror-style yokai that can materialize if a mirror reaches 100 years old, and often portrayed with the face of a mirror. There's also the Shomakyo in Chinese tales, which is a demon-revealing mirror that shows the true form of spirits, monsters, and shapeshifters. Now, in a more modern instance of occult panic, you have the knot-tying shadow, the 1988 Harbin shadow panic. The so-called knot-tying shadow panic, sometimes retroactively labeled the 1988 Harbin shadow panic, is one of those late 20th century Chinese rumor events that feels vividly specific in retelling, yet proves remarkably elusive in terms of hard documentation. Centered, or at least in the narratives, in Harbin in 1988, the story describes a wave of panic surrounding an unseen or barely glimpsed entity, often characterized as a shadow being or dark human-shaped presence that was said to enter homes at night and tie knots in people's hair, clothing, or bedding as they slept. In more extreme versions, the entity was believed to immobilize victims, induce nightmares, or leave behind physical evidence that served as proof of its visitation. As with several of the other cases we've been exploring, the key to understanding this phenomena lies less in verifying a single discrete incident and more in unpacking how multiple layers of belief, physiology, and rumor converge into a coherent narrative. At its core, the knot-tying motif taps into very old symbolic and folkloric logic. Across Chinese traditions, knots have been associated with binding, control, and the manipulation of invisible forces, whether in the form of protective charms, ritual cord magic, or metaphorical entanglements of fate and spirit. The idea that an unseen entity might tie something on or around the body during sleep carries an immediate implication that the victim has been acted upon, constrained, or marked by an external force. And this dovetails closely with long-standing beliefs about nocturnal spirit encounters in which a sleeper is visited, pressed upon, or otherwise interfered with by supernatural presences. By the late 1980s, these older motifs were interacting with a rapidly changing social and informational environment. China was deep into its reform era, and urban centers like Harbin were experiencing both modernization and a resurgence of interest in anomalous phenomena, which some scholars have described as a kind of qigong or qigong fever of a broader cultural reopening to the extraordinary. Within this context, reports of strange nighttime experiences, waking up unable to move, sensing a presence, discovering inexplicable tangles or knots, could spread quickly through word of mouth, workplace gossip, and local media. Once a narrative frame was established, a shadow is doing this, subsequent experiences were more likely to be interpreted through that same lens. From a physiological and psychological perspective, many of the reported features align closely with what's now obviously recognized as sleep paralysis, often accompanied by hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations. During such states, individuals may experience a vivid sense of unknown presence, visual or auditory hallucinations, and an inability to move. Sensations that have been interpreted in different cultures as attacks by demons, ghosts, or other entities. The addition of knot tying may reflect either post-event interpretation, such as discovering ordinary tangles and attributing them to these episodes, or small unconscious movements during disturbed sleep that are later perceived as deliberate external actions. What gives the Harbin case its distinctive character, however, is the collective dimension. Later retellings describe not just isolated experiences, but a kind of localized panic in which multiple individuals reported similar events within a short timeline. And in some versions, entire neighborhoods were said to be affected, while in others, factories or dormitories became hotspots of rumor and fear. People began checking one another for signs of knots, discussing their encounters, and reinforcing the belief that something external and intentional was at work. So, with the 1768 soul-stealing panic or the fox spirit scares, the spread of the story itself became a main driving force behind the phenomenon. But as with the Worm Man and Mirror Soul cases, the evidence trail is thin. There's little in the way of contemporaneous newspaper archives, police records, or scientific reports that clearly document a large-scale shadow panic in Harbin in 1988. This absence suggests a few possibilities: that the incident was highly localized and never reached broader official attention, that it consisted of scattered, unrelated experiences later woven into a single narrative, or that it's in large part a retrospective construct shaped by the storytelling conventions of paranormal literature and early internet culture. The specificity of the date and location may, paradoxically, be part of what gives the story its credibility in retelling, even if those details were stabilized only after the fact. There's also an interesting thematic resonance with other global night attack traditions. The old hag in Newfoundland, or all over the world really, incubus and succubus traditions in European lore, or various shadow person phenomena reported in all types of modern contexts. In each case, a combination of sleep disturbance, cultural expectation, and narrative reinforcement produces a remarkably consistent experiential template. So the knot-tying shadow can be seen as a localized variation of a broader human pattern, distinguished primarily by its use of knots as the physical evidence of an otherwise intangible encounter. So in narrative terms, the knot-tying shadow panic is less a single incident than a convergence event. Traditional symbolism of knots and binding, universal human experience, such as sleep paralysis, and the late 20th century rumor dynamics all aligning in a specific time and place. So whether or not there was ever a night in 1988 when Harbin was truly gripped by a shared fear of shadowy intruders, the story captures something very real about how such fears can take shape. Quietly, in the dark, one tangled thread at a time, until the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. I especially find the concept of cultural expectation very intriguing in cases like this. It's almost as if we can build stories that have a specific outcome or effect on us. I'm wondering if this, for lack of a better term, technology can be utilized in other various ways. But that's something I'm working on in the background and is quite unwieldy as far as concepts go. There's an alleged time slip incident in 1993 of the Shanghai Metro line. There are a ton of alleged psychic child reports and cases. For more on that, go listen to the Chinese government parapsychology episode. There is an alleged 1986 radio ghost of the Great Wall. Apparently, visitors to the Great Wall of China who had portable radios with them or were using, walkie-talkie systems, etc., were allegedly receiving unexplained broadcasts of what essentially amounts to EVP. What else? There's the white-eyed villagers of southern Hunan. There was allegedly some kind of outbreak of what, for all intents and purposes, sounds like cataracts, but people were able to see fine. There was some kind of just a weird outbreak of just white eyes. It's just classified as a folkloric anomaly rather than any sort of documented epidemic case or anything like that. There's one particular story I'm trying to find through all the ones that I've gathered up here that is, because I'm already at, 2.5? Jeez Louise. Okay. There's an alleged story of the electronic monk of the Wudang Mountains in 1984. Supposedly, and this ties in heavily, I don't think I discussed this in the Chinese government parapsychology episode, but it ties into much of the foundations and institutions that were doing research into various weird shit. And allegedly, there was a Taoist monk who was reportedly able to generate electricity through his fingertips. Real life superhero shit going on there. There was an alleged Bagua possession case of 1994. This is part of a documented. Well, I spoke earlier about like Kundalini sickness, etc. Like certain physiological effects of improper meditation techniques, etc. Supposedly, during the Qigong boom and the Qigong fever, there was a middle-aged man in Wuhan who became obsessed with something called the Step of Yu, which is a Mao Shan ritual dance used to command the stars. He practiced it for 18 hours a day in a local park. He eventually claimed he was no longer human, but a vessel for a Yao Gui, or a mountain demon or spirit, or Yao Guai. He began eating raw meat and spoke in a dialect that linguists later identified as a form of archaic Middle Chinese. When medical professionals attempted to sedate him, he reportedly exhibited hysterical strength, quote-unquote hysterical strength, tossing 4 grown men across the room. Witnesses claimed his eyes turned a dull, milky amber, and he began describing the deaths of the doctor's relatives with surgical precision. That's fucking terrifying. He eventually died of a burst heart, or myocardial rupture, while screaming that the mountain was calling its property back. This is largely, obviously, intensely within the realms of urban legend. There's an alleged haunting that followed up the notorious Hello Kitty murders. Apparently, several people encountered spirits throughout this particular criminal event. The Faceless General of the 1930s. This is another malevolent deity or entity encounter or repeated encounter. Soul Exchange of the 1920s. I believe this is term Yihun, often translated as Soul Exchange, and the alleged Harbin incident of the 1920s. There was supposed Mao Shan black magic / superstition taking place. A housewife was possessed. She began to eat unhuman things, quote-unquote unhuman things, like charcoal, hair, and eventually her own fingers. There was a man who became so obsessed with fixing her that he began kidnapping drifters to feed the spirit, believing he could negotiate with the demon for his wife's return. He was found months later living in a basement filled with ritual dolls made of human hair. Completely insane. There's the story of the Nanjing Road mannequins, allegedly sentient mannequins in the 1990s that were found along the roadside. There's the alleged spirit phone encounters of the 1920s. This was sort of a occult obsession or mass hysteria of sorts, that Taoist sorcerers were using telephones to sort of call people, and whoever answered the phone, they would hear a sort of, magic words, incantations that sort of suck the soul right out of them, supposedly. There were stories of soulless reanimated soldiers in the 1979 border war during the Sino-Vietnamese War. See, there was tales of red thread murders. This was a sort of 2015 overseas diaspora thing that alleged occult crimes occurring in various Chinatowns across the world. The fact that there's no one specific Chinatown pegged down for these kind of confirms the urban legend status, although it's usually, the stories are usually settled in London's Chinatown. Usually involved a young male victim found deceased in his apartment under very dubious conditions. The body allegedly intact but wrapped tightly in red silk thread, with death attributed to suffocation. There were always additional ritual elements appended in various retellings of the stories. There is one particular case, however, that I'm trying to find that I really want to include in this, and I think it's here it is. Okay, I think this is it. So there's very much a real practice known as feng shui. I'm sure most people are familiar with it. It's more than just where to put a fountain in your house, though. There are apparently, especially in Hong Kong and Taiwan, as well as various Southeast Asian real estate, this stuff comes into play big time. So in the West, we think of it as, where to put a plant for good vibes. But in the various black magic or alleged Mao Shan traditions, it's viewed as a sort of metaphysical architecture. You can arrange a space to harmonize energy or qi. You can also deliberately arrange it to strangle qi or block it. This is known as killing feng shui or malevolent layouts. So the core concept is sha qi or sha qi, killing energy. The goal of a feng shui assassination, JFK Trinity, isn't to walk in with a weapon. It's to create a physical environment that causes the victim to suffer accidental death, sudden illness, or financial ruin. There's a configuration known as the poison arrow. This involves directing sharp, linear energy at a person's bed or desk. A building across the street with a sharp corner pointing directly at your window is considered a poison arrow. There's the bow and arrow layout. If a road curves toward a house like a drawn bow and the front door is where the arrow would sit, it's believed the inhabitants will suffer violent deaths or blood accidents, quote unquote, such as car crashes or surgical mishaps. And there's a infamous case known as the Bank of China versus HSBC war. This is the gold standard of feng shui warfare occurring in the 1980s and 90s in Hong Kong. This is a documented corporate conflict. When the Bank of China Tower was built, its prism-like triangular design was seen by feng shui masters as a series of giant cleavers. One of these cleaver edges pointed directly at the HSBC headquarters. After the tower was completed, HSBC's performance plummeted, and the governor of Hong Kong, whose house was also quote-unquote hit, suffered a heart attack. HSBC didn't just ignore it. They hired their own Black Path masters. They installed 2 maintenance cranes on their roof that look exactly like anti-aircraft cannons, pointed directly back at the Bank of China's cleaver to quote-unquote shoot down the negative energy. The so-called Bank of China versus HSBC Feng Shui War is one of the most famous modern architectural urban legends, centered in Hong Kong and revolving around 2 iconic skyscrapers, the Bank of China Tower and the HSBC headquarters building. Despite being widely repeated in documentaries, tours, and online folklore discussions, it's important to note that there was never an actual institutional war or formalized conflict between the 2 banks over feng shui. Instead, the story is a retrospective narrative framework built around real architectural choices, local cultural interpretation, and the symbolic language of feng shui applied to modern high-rise construction. The legend centers on the construction of the Bank of China Tower, designed by I.M. Pei, a famous architect, and completed in 1990, whose angular blade-like geometry dramatically reshaped the skyline of Hong Kong. In feng shui interpretation, sharp edges and triangular forms are often associated with cutting energy, or disruptive flows of qi when directed towards neighboring structures. According to popular narrative, some practitioners and local observers claim that the building's faceted form appeared to direct poison arrow energy towards surrounding financial institutions. The most frequently cited target in this story is the nearby HSBC headquarters, designed by Norman Foster and completed in 1985. At the time of construction, it was one of the most advanced and expensive commercial buildings in the world, noted for its modular elevated structure and exposed service systems. In feng shui storytelling, it is often described as a building that incorporated extensive consultation with feng shui masters, allegedly to ensure stability, prosperity, and protection in the competitive financial environment of Hong Kong. Within the Feng Shui War narrative, the interaction between these 2 buildings is dramatized as a kind of architectural duel. The angular form of the Bank of China Tower is said to have created negative energetic pressure on the HSBC building, prompting HSBC to install symbolic countermeasures. The most famous of these is a pair of large cannon-like structural elements mounted on the HSBC Plaza rooftop, which face outwards towards the city. So in folklore interpretations, these are said to be defensive cannons intended to repel harmful energy directed from neighboring skyscrapers. Some versions of the story escalate even further, claiming that HSBC later added mirrors, structural adjustments, or additional feng shui enhancements to redirect or neutralize the perceived influences of the nearby tower. In the most exaggerated retellings, the entire financial district becomes framed as a battleground of competing energetic systems, with buildings attacking and defending each other through geometry, orientation, and symbolic design. The Feng Shui narrative, or the Feng Shui war narrative, emerges instead from the intersection of three cultural and historical dynamics. First off, Feng Shui is a long-standing traditional system in Chinese culture used to interpret spatial relationships, environmental harmony, and auspicious placement. In modern commercial architecture in Hong Kong, Feng Shui consultants are sometimes informally engaged, but their role is advisory and symbolic rather than determining structural engineering decisions, essentially. Second, the dramatic visual contrast between the two buildings naturally invites metaphoric interpretation. The sharp geometric form of the Bank of China Tower and the modular elevated structure of the HSBC headquarters creates a striking visual dialogue in the skyline of Hong Kong, which lends itself easily to narrative framing as opposition or competition. Third, the story is reinforced by global media fascination with mystical explanations of modern financial power. So in this framing, corporate architecture becomes a stage for symbolic struggle, and Feng Shui becomes a language through which economic competition is reinterpreted as metaphysical conflict. So over time, the war narrative has been amplified in tourism material, informal guides, and online storytelling, often presented as a factual anecdote rather than a metaphorical interpretation. This has led to widespread belief in a literal architectural conflict, despite the absence of any institutional records supporting such a claim. But, I mean, who would keep records of such a thing, honestly? In its most accurate form, the Bank of China versus HSBC Feng Shui War isn't a historical event or documented dispute. It's a modern mythologizing of urban architecture in Hong Kong, in which real buildings by the Bank of China and HSBC are reinterpreted through the symbolic framework of Feng Shui, transforming aesthetic and engineering choices into a narrative of energetic competition or warfare between financial giants. I wanted to include this one specifically because I love these stories of architectural geomancy, megalopolomancy, psychogeography, and psychic architecture, things like that. I find these stories incredibly fascinating. Allegedly, there's also the needle in the heart formation, which is a Feng Shui, black magic Feng Shui technique used to drive neighbors out or for residential assassination. Practitioner might hide a quote-unquote bone-chilling needle, which is a needle wrapped in hair and cursed, behind a neighbor's drywall during a renovation. They might install a massive mirror in their own hallway that reflects the neighbor's front door. So in Black Taoism, this bounces the neighbor's luck away before it can enter their home, effectively starving the household of life force. There's also the alleged centipede layout, which is a particularly nasty urban legend from the 1990s involving a hotel in Southeast Asia that was failing. A sorcerer suggested a quote-unquote centipede layout. The building was renovated so that the plumbing and wiring resembled the legs of a centipede and the head was the main entrance. The catch was that for the centipede to provide well, it had to quote-unquote eat. It was rumored that the hotel was designed to funnel the yang energy of its guests into the owner's private suite, and guests began reporting extreme exhaustion, intense nightmares, and a feeling of being drained after sleeping there just one night. There's also the idea of coffin houses and spirit traps. So developers have been accused of building structures that are yin-heavy by design. The hallways are intentionally long, dark, and narrow, resembling a coffin. This is done to trap wandering spirits inside the building. Why would anyone want to trap ghosts? Well, in some dark traditions, a haunted building can be used to sink the value of a rival's surrounding properties, or the trapped spirits can be harvested by a resident sorcerer for the yang gui or ghost servant rituals that were discussed earlier. This is what's going to make the episode run extra long today. Hong Kong and Taiwan. This is a perfect way to tie a lot of this together. So think of the relationships like this. Mainland China is the ancient source of the traditions. But during the 20th century, it underwent a great reset, the Cultural Revolution. This is why things like 0 Year in Cambodia and the Chinese Great Cultural Revolution, this is why talk of reset in America often disturbs me, because these were fucking horrifying events in history. That's what troubles me about talk like that. I mean, the more I see how fucked up things are in America, I mean, yeah, we kind of need to figure some shit out, but we don't need a complete reset. It's gonna go badly. It's never gone well in history. Anywho, the Cultural Revolution was officially it officially banned quote-unquote feudal superstitions. So Hong Kong and Taiwan essentially became these sort of spiritual lifeboats. These nodes of preservation of more fringe spiritual ideas and practices, beliefs, etc. So Hong Kong was a British colony until 1997 and became a high-tech capitalist pressure cooker where ancient Taoism merged with modern-day money. So in the world capital of feng shui warfare and urban ghost lore, this is what Hong Kong, by default sort of morphed into. Taiwan, on the other hand, since 1949, it's operated as a separate entity from the mainland because it never had a cultural revolution. Taiwan is sort of the living museum of Chinese occultism. It has the most insane, intense, uninterrupted transitions of shamanism, spirit mediumship, and black Taoism. So in short, the mainland has the the secret government and spooky Bureau 749 type shit going on, while Hong Kong and Taiwan have the unfiltered living magic. So in Hong Kong, the high strangeness is industrial. It's built into the architecture and the legal system. The MTR, or Metropolitan Rail, is said to be haunted, similar to the Shanghai Metro. There's the Nam Ku Terrace, or the Red House, a preserved colonial mansion in Wan Chai. During World War II, it was used as a military brothel by the Japanese, so I'm sure you can imagine there's some horrific fucking psychic stains on this place. It's so notoriously haunted that in 2003, a group of teenagers reportedly went in for a dare, and one girl became violently possessed. She began to speak in a guttural, masculine Japanese voice, and it took several police officers to restrain her. The case was widely reported in the South China Morning Post. There's also the whispering high-rises. In the 1990s, a series of suicides at the Heng Fa Chuen estate led to rumors of soul-stealing layouts. Masters of feng shui claimed the buildings were shaped like incense burners for the dead, unintentionally invited wandering spirits to settle in the apartments and drive the residents fucking mad. Now, in Taiwan, this place is also known as the land of 10,000 altars. Taiwanese high strangeness is usually more visceral, involving spirit mediums or tang qi, as well as malevolent folk deities. There's the red envelope curse. This is a sort of addendum to the ghost marriage phenomena. In rural Taiwan, if you see a red envelope lying on the street, do not pick it up. It often contains a lock of hair or a photo of a deceased girl within. If you pick it up, the girl's family, who is usually hiding nearby, will emerge and claim you are now the groom to this dead girl. This is a true horror story because legally and socially, these ghost marriages are still honored in certain communities, and refusing them can lead to black Mao Shan curses from the family's priest or the family themselves. There's also the case of the little girl in red from 1998. This is Taiwan's most famous modern cryptid or Yao Guai story. A family hiking in the Taichung Mountains caught a video of a pale girl in a red dress following them. Everyone in the video, except the girl, later died or met with horrific accidents. The girl is believed to be a Mao Shan or mountain demon, a creature that mimics human children to lead people to their deaths in the wilderness. I believe the actual videotape of this incident is online for anyone to watch if you are interested. There's also the Jinhai Tunnel in Taipei. This tunnel is built next to a massive mortuary. Drivers report the passenger who wasn't there. Is an often reoccurring sort of folk spirit encounter motif. If you look in your rearview mirror and you see an old woman sitting in your back seat, if you speak to her, you will crash. The realistic occult theory is that the tunnel acts as a spirit highway, and that cars often act as vessels for ghosts trying to move from the mortuary into the city. There's also the Black Taoist assassins of the diaspora community in the various Chinatowns of the West, New York, Sydney, San Francisco, London. The occult history often involves triad rituals. There's the 36 Oaths. When a member joins a triad, they undergo a ritual that is essentially a blood contract overseen by a Maoshan instance master. If the member betrays the gang, it's believed that the spirit generals of the ritual will literally hunt their soul down. There's also the needle and the doll. During the Tong Wars in the 1920s, it wasn't just guns being used. Quote-unquote highbinders or assassins would reportedly visit black priests to have curse bullets made. Bullets etched with the victim's name and soaked in vinegar and blood to ensure that even a grazing wound would lead to a supernatural infection or spirit rot. Then there were the mirror wars of the 1980s. This was more corporate occultism. In both Taiwan and Hong Kong, businesses often engage in mirror wars. If a new bank opens across from an old one, the old one might install a bagua mirror to reflect the new bank's wealth back onto the street. The new bank responds by installing 2 mirrors. This escalates until the street is a hall of mirrors that creates a dead zone in the middle where no birds fly, cars frequently stall, etc. This is a documented urban phenomena that city planners in Hong Kong have had to address in building codes. Hong Kong is often sometimes referred to as the vertical hell. There was an event referred to as the 7 fox faces at the Windsor House in the 1980s. Faces of foxes appeared in the marble facade of a mall. The legend says that they caused the death of a newborn during a banquet. The marble was removed, but a rooftop spirit playground was reportedly built to appease them. You had the Yao Ma Tai Vanish 1981 case. A train driver felt a thump and saw a girl jump onto the tracks. Despite passengers witnessing it and police dismantling the entire train, no body, blood, or trace of a human being was ever found. You had the aforementioned Hello Kitty murder, which is a kidnapping and torture case where it's very well documented. You can find information about it anywhere. I think the less reported aspects were that this kidnapping and torture case, where the victim's head was hidden in a Hello Kitty doll, eventually turned into a haunting of the apartment, a haunting that was so severe that the building was demolished. Priests refused to cleanse it due to the demonic interference allegedly said to be taking place on the property. You've also got Bride's Pool Road, a scenic waterfall where a bride drowned. Sightings of a woman in red waving down cars are frequent. Statistically, it's a massive accident spot with many crashed vehicles being red. Red cars, in particular, are found to have excessive amounts of accidents in this area. We've also got the Tuen Mun ghost bus, reports of a late-night bus that picks up passengers but never stops. Those who realize the passengers are motionless often find themselves miles away from their destination with no memory of how they got there. There's the Single Braid Road, a spirit at the Chinese University of Hong Kong with a braid on her back and another on her face. Legend says she was a stowaway whose hair got caught in a train, ripping her face off. See, this is the good stuff. There's also Nights of Entanglement. This is alleged cursed media. A 1980s song by Connie Mack, M-A-K. Hong Kong radio DJs to this day refuse to play it late at night because it reportedly causes equipment to run backwards and shadow figures to manifest in the studio. Now moving to Taiwan, there's the aforementioned little girl in red. This is viral video footage from Taichung showing a pale girl in red following a family. Most people in the video died shortly thereafter. She's considered a Maoshan, a nature demon that tags along to steal souls. That's a particularly strange case. It's I haven't watched the video footage. I'm sure I want to. Let's see. Also in Taiwan, there's the Wanli UFO Village, a cluster of abandoned futuristic pod houses. A lot of people are probably familiar with these. Originally a luxury resort, it became a hotspot for UFO sightings and cult activities in the 80s. Locals claimed the land's feng shui was ruined by the pods. There's the Grand Hyatt Taipei, built on a former World War II execution ground / prison. The lobby features a giant Taoist seal painting specifically designed to keep spirits trapped in the sub-basement so they don't bother the guests. There's the Tainan Ghost Hospital. The abandoned Jinglin Hospital became so popular for ghost hunting that the government had to seal it because visitors were suffering from quote-unquote soul loss, fainting, and personality shifts after leaving, as well as numerous cases of spirit possession. There's also many 1980s cult panics. During Taiwan's rapid modernization, several secret sects were accused of ritualistically using blood and child hair to bless businesses, leading to a series of high-profile police raids. While mainland China underwent the Cultural Revolution, which sought to dismantle the Four Olds, including superstitions, Hong Kong and Taiwan became the vaults where these traditions were protected and preserved. Hong Kong represents the urban occult, high-rises, corporate feng shui wars, and ghosts in the subway, while Taiwan represents the ancestral occult, shamanism, village curses, and forest demons. In these regions, the supernatural isn't just a story, it's a factor in urban planning, legal disputes, and daily business. As far as cults go, there's also Yiguan Dao, the Way of Unity. So while Yiguan Dao is now a recognized and largely mainstream religion in Taiwan, it spent decades in the quote-unquote occult underground, both on the mainland and in Hong Kong. During the mid-20th century, it was persecuted as a secret society, or evil cult. Its cult reputation stemmed from its highly secretive initiation rituals, which reportedly involved the three treasures: a secret mudra, or hand sign, a secret mantra, and a symbolic opening of the third eye, quote-unquote. So during the Black Path era of the 50s and 60s, rumors persisted that rogue branches of the sect were using these rituals not for salvation, but to create bound followers who were psychologically incapable of disobeying their masters. A form of spiritual lobotomy, as it were, allegedly investigated as a psychological weapon by the Chinese government. It's also the Lingxin spirit body cults of Hong Kong. Hong Kong's high-pressure environment has given rise to several spirit body cults that focus on self-deification. These groups often target the wealthy elites and celebrities, promising that through specialized Mao Shan-derived inner alchemy, they can achieve physical immortality or transfer their consciousness into a younger body. These groups are notorious for energy harvesting rituals, where followers are led to believe they must provide financial or vitality offerings to the leader to maintain the leader's supernatural power. In the 1980s and 90s, several quote-unquote masters were investigated after followers were found in states of severe malnutrition and mental collapse, claiming they had given their souls to the master in exchange for corporate success. In the more rural parts of Taiwan, heterodox cults occasionally surface that worship Yao Gui, or nature demons, rather than traditional gods. One of the most disturbing trends involves the worship of the white snake, or fox immortals, for sexual or financial magnetism. While usually harmless folk worship, the black magic versions of these cults have been linked to ritualistic crimes where spirit mediums claim that the deity requires a quote-unquote unpolluted blood sacrifice to grant a specific wish. These cases are often hushed up by the local authorities to prevent mass panic, but they appear in the occult dossiers as evidence of dark Taoism that persists beneath the surface of Taiwan's democratic society. The Cult Spectrum dossier has documented examples for categories we haven't fully explored, such as a deep dive into Qindao's broadcast incident. Listen to the Golf Rumors episode for more on that. Yeah, there's other groups such as that were founded in Taiwan, such as Supreme Master Qinghai, the Kuan Yin method, Suma, or Supreme Master Qinghai, One of the very few female-led cults out there. They represent a peaceful vegan front today, but their early high strangeness phase involved intense secrecy and the Kuan Yin, or inner light and sound method. Initiation was historically secretive and involved the quote-unquote transmission of a spiritual power that followers claim felt like an electrical shock or a forced opening of the mind. So in the 1990s, they were investigated for massive, untraceable financial movements across Hong Kong and Taiwan. The master often claimed that she could communicate with intergalactic councils. Her followers often viewed her as a universal queen, quote-unquote, and there were reports of members entering meditative trances so deep that they required hospitalization, claiming that they had traveled to other dimensions under her command. There's the aforementioned snake spirit and sacrificial groups of rural Ping Tung in the 1990s. These were small, decentralized cells of dark path practitioners in southern Taiwan who worshipped a specific Yao Guai known as the Bai Shi, or white snake of the underworld. So unlike the benevolent white snake of legend, these groups practice luck stealing. In the mid-90s, police investigated reports of ritualistic animal killings where the blood was used to paint binding talismans on the doors of successful rival businesses. Rumors persist in Taiwan's dark mythology that these groups engaged in blood debt rituals where a practitioner would offer their own health or that of a relative to the snake spirit in exchange for a killing curse against an enemy. There's the self-deification circle that operated out of luxury villas in the Peak, which is Hong Kong's most expensive neighborhood. They claimed to practice a lost Mao Shan technique for quote-unquote cellular immortality. The members, mostly high-level CEOs and socialites, were reportedly put through sensory deprivation rituals where they were locked in copper-lined rooms for days to purge their mortal chi. Several members reportedly suffered occult madness, quote-unquote, becoming convinced that they were immortal generals. One high-profile disappearance in the late 80s was linked to this group. The individual was never found, but his will was signed over to the master of the group just days before he vanished. There's the Tak Tak School in Pingshan, Hong Kong, an abandoned school often cited as the most haunted place in Hong Kong. It's built on a land where local villagers resisted the British in 1899, leading to, unfortunately, a mass grave. Later served as a refugee camp and a site of numerous suicides. So there's this supposed woman in red. 2001, a group of students exploring the school saw a woman in red. One girl became violently possessed, as mentioned earlier, attempting to bite her classmates and exhibiting quote-unquote superhuman strength. Taxis in the area reportedly refused to pick up passengers near the school gates at night because their electronic meters begin to spin wildly or display 888, which is a lucky number, but is used here as a alleged mocking sign from the spirits. So, to wrap up, a classic Mao Shan warning. In the West, we think of ghosts as echoes of the past. In the occult history of China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, they are predators in the present. So whether it's a cleaver building in Hong Kong, a red envelope in Taipei, or a TV broadcast in Garland, fucking Texas, the high strangeness isn't looking for your attention, looking for your chi. So be wary, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between, or on the outside, inside, and reverse elements, directions, accounts, angles, whatever thereof. That's going to wrap it up. This was a long one, but this was like the coolest shit that I say out of all the China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan stuff that I found. And there's tons more shit I had to cut, but this is the grand finale of our week in China. I also wanted to mention that a lot of people are into Professor Jiang. If you're unfamiliar with him, don't worry about becoming familiar with him. But a lot of people are kind of wising up to his bullshit, and that's kind of one of the elements that got me like pushed in this direction to looking into specific Chinese stuff, because there's a lot of question as to whether Professor Jiang is a Chinese intelligence asset, which I think is quite plausible. His story has some certain similarities to that of Lee Harvey Oswald. But the problem with him is that he takes elements of very realistic history of secret societies and esoteric lore, and he sort of muddles it up with confusing bullshit. But he is right on one thing. There is a certain apocalyptic script that's being followed by the Abrahamic religions, specifically Christianity and Judaism, I think, that are potentially leading to a problematic apex cataclysm in the West. And I don't know, just if you're a lot of people are into Professor Jiang, and I don't know, that's fine. Just, have discernment is all I'm saying. But this is over 3 hours now. I'm gonna wrap it up. I appreciate you all for listening. You guys are the fucking best. I love you guys. Thank you so much. This has been Kooks, Pranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lucht, and I will see you on the next episode, which is a sequel to a recent episode. I found more information that needs to be aired. So, keep an ear out, eye out, third eye out for that particular episode coming soon. You guys are the fucking best. I love you. See you on the next one.
My tiger kung fu is better than yours.